Robert Baratheon's groans resounded through the great hall of the Red Keep, a low rumble that caused every retainer and guard in earshot to turn anxious eyes upon him. But today those groans were not of agony alone, there was an undercurrent of resilience, a fight beneath the pain. The king's bed had been moved from his private chambers to this more spacious and better ventilated room. By the king's explicit command, the monstrous, hulking shape of his bed, draped in crimson and gold blankets, took pride of place near the raised dais. He wanted to be among his people once he could manage it, and Robert Baratheon, nursing a wound that had nearly taken his life, had insisted upon rejoining the wider world. Half the court had expressed doubts about this unorthodox arrangement, but Robert had snarled at them to keep quiet. He would convalesce where he chose. Days earlier, the king had hovered near death, victim to a boar's tusk that had torn through his side. Some said it was the drink that dulled his wits in the hunt, others whispered of foul play. Yet all had believed that Robert Baratheon would slip into the stranger's realm, never again to roar his triumphs or pound his fists in laughter. But as if he had grown tired of the very notion of dying, Robert had awakened from the brink. For a few unsteady days it seemed the king might slip away again, but he clung stubbornly to life. And now, propped up with cushions, one thick arm in a sling, bandages fresh around his torso, he surveyed the half-circle of nobles that had gathered at his summons. At the king's left stood Eddard Stark, newly returned from his own convalescence of sorts, a broken leg from that wretched altercation just outside Littlefinger's brothel. He had refused the use of a cane now, though he still favored his weight on his uninjured leg. Ned's gray eyes were troubled, face drawn. Though he had insisted on being near the king these past days, seeing Robert awake and bellowing again brought an unexpected swirl of relief mingled with apprehension. For though Robert lived, the realm's troubles had not melted away. Instead, they had bred in the shadows, multiplying and knitting themselves into a complicated tapestry of political knots. Cersei Lannister hovered some distance away, stiff and pale. Her emerald eyes flicked to her husband but never lingered, as if she had no more power over his fate. Near her stood the king's guard in their white cloaks and polished armor. Ser Barristan Selmy Barristan the Bold observed quietly, his lined face impassive. With him were Ser Marentrant and Ser Boros Blunt. Jaime Lannister, the Kingslayer, was nowhere to be seen. Whispers said he hovered in Tywin's vicinity, commanding forces in the field. Ser Renly Baratheon and the Master of Coin, Peter Baelish, angled in from the side, each wearing an expression more akin to curiosity than devotion. Varys, the Master of Whisperers, loomed behind them in his rich robes, hands folded over his belly, his face carefully arranged in neutrality. Grand Maester Pycelle, stooped and wheezing, lingered by one of the tall windows to catch the breeze. The hush in the hall felt oppressive, as if each breath might crack the hush of expectation. They wondered if the king would speak or slip back into unconsciousness. Robert's eyes cut across the gathering and settled on Eddard. A faint grin, pained but genuine, curled across the king's bearded face. "Ned," he said, his voice cracked. Yet the single syllable carried as much fervor as one of his old war cries. "Your king has need of you." Ned bowed his head, stepping forward, ignoring the stabs of discomfort in his leg. "Your Grace, you need only command me." Robert let out a strangled chuckle. "Don't talk so pretty, Ned, it doesn't suit you. But this time, by all the old gods, I truly do need you. Come closer." Ned complied. He positioned himself at the king's bedside, and Robert reached out a trembling hand. It felt hot and clammy as it seized Ned's forearm. The king's black hair, once thick and lustrous, was shot through with more gray than Ned remembered, and his eyes were sunken from his ordeal. "You see me, old friend," Robert said softly, a note of self-mockery in his voice, "a dying boar instead of the fearsome huntsman I once was. Yet that boar got the worst of it, I'd say. Still, that cursed tusk. I dream about it tearing me apart some nights." He exhaled roughly. "But I'll not let it finish me. The realm can't afford me to die just yet. Not with the Lannisters mustering on our doorstep." Ned inclined his head. "The realm, I fear, is already uneasy, Your Grace. Rumors swirl about Lord Tywin's maneuvers in the Riverlands and beyond. Riverrun is under threat. Harrenhal bristles with the Lannisters' men. Tywin might press upon the crown if we're not vigilant." Robert's lips twitched. "Aye, Tywin's cunning. I always knew that. But he has no love for me or for my rightful heirs, and half the realm doubts how long I'll last. They eye my crown as though it might tumble off my head into the dust. The vultures gather." He paused, flicking a glance towards Cersei. "Our good father-by-law is tightening his grip. He uses the children as pretext, or maybe in spite of them. Who can fathom Tywin's intentions?" A pregnant hush fell. Cersei's slender hands clenched at her sides, but she did not speak. Ned, mindful of her presence, lowered his voice. Your Grace, if Tywin means to press an advantage, we should act swiftly. Robert let out a weary laugh. Ned, that's why I want you at the head of the royal army. The loyal men of the Crownlands, the Stormlands, even men from the Reach if we can muster them by alliance or agreement. There are enough knights and bannermen who still remember I was the one who broke the Targaryens. They'll rally to me. And to you if you speak in my name. Ned's heart thumped against his chest. The memory of rebellion flickered in his mind, Robert triumphant at the Trident, the young men they'd been, forging a new world with steel and blood. They had done it once, but everything felt older and more complicated now. Still, there was something in Robert's eyes that reminded him of the unyielding warrior he had once followed without question. And what of your condition, your grace? Ned asked quietly. Robert's eyes flicked with irritation. Don't coddle me. I'll live. The realm expects me to do so. And I will heal, given time. He gestured to his bandaged torso. I can't sit a horse today, but I can still be king. And we need a commander in the field who won't falter, who won't let Tywin slip the noose. Another pause, then more quietly, I can't trust most of these court snakes to handle this war. You, Ned, if you lead, men will remember the valor of our youth. They'll follow. In that moment, Ned Stark realized the heavy burden about to be laid upon him. If he refused, if he tried to pass it to someone else, Stannis or Renly, would Robert survive the slight? Would the realm endure the indecision? Ned could feel Cersei's cold gaze on his back, though she said nothing. She must have known that Tywin's defeat would degrade her position. And yet, with Robert rallying, perhaps her vantage had changed. Ned bowed his head again. Your Grace, I'm yours to command. If you will it, I'll gather the men loyal to you and drive Tywin back. A hush spread among the assembled courtiers. Robert's voice, brimming with relief, cut through it. Good. Very good. Then we'll announce it on the morrow. Peter, he snapped his fingers at Littlefinger, whose mocking half-smile froze, draw up the finances needed to outfit the troops, see that they're quartered and fed. Varys, send your little birds to glean what you can of Tywin's positions. Renly, alert the lords in the Stormlands that I am not dead and their king bids them muster. I want knights, crossbowmen, foot soldiers, all of them at the ready. The time for dithering is done. Those men nodded in turn, each wearing the partial mask of courtiers who realized the king had regained a measure of his old vigor despite the wound. The fearsome Robert who had crushed the Targaryen dynasty showed a glimpse of his past might. And so, with hearts pounding and cunning calculations whirling behind placid facades, the council parted. That night, Ned Stark lay awake in his chambers, thinking of the path ahead. This was no glorious rebellion. The realm was no longer an anvil waiting to be struck into shape. He was about to fight not Mad Aerys Targaryen, but Tywin Lannister, Warden of the West and father to the Queen. Defeating Tywin meant unraveling the Lannisters' power. The implications for the royal succession, for the children in line to the throne, were immeasurable. Yet Robert had spoken. Ned had given his word. And so he could only press forward. Rain drummed against the stone walls of the Red Keep the next morning. Smoke from guttering torches drifted through the corridors as Ned Stark made his way to Robert's makeshift bedchamber. The great hall had emptied in the early hours, but several loyal knights still guarded the king's bed. They straightened when they saw Ned approach. Inside, he found Robert propped up by 4 pillows, a bowl of watered wine on the table beside him. The king's face was flushed from pain, yet his eyes were sharp. He beckoned Ned forward. There you are, Ned, Robert said, lowering his voice. I've had hours of thinking in the dark of the night. The more I think, the more I know we must strike quickly. Ned nodded. There's rumor that Tywin's men have begun to harass the River Lords again, even after we brokered that uneasy truce. Ser Gregor Clegane was last seen along the Trident. Robert's mouth twisted. The mountain, he spat, as though the mere mention of Gregor's name was gall in his throat. I'll have his head eventually. Perhaps you'll do the realm a favor and bring it to me. Ned inclined his head, though his voice remained steady. I will do my duty, your grace. But I must know our plan in full. Tywin is no fool, he'll have watchers on the roads. Perhaps even watchers in this castle. Robert's gaze flicked around the chamber as if expecting a spy among the shadows. Aye, that's why I decided we must catch him unawares. You will gather what men can be quickly mustered from the Crownlands and the Stormlands, take a swift march north through the King's Road, then cut westward across the Riverlands. Tywin likely expects us to approach from the south, or he expects that I'm still too weak to mount a large-scale push. If you swing north, rally with the Tullus at Riverrun, then turn west, you can outflank Tywin's main force. Pin him against the Red Fork or the borders of the Westerlands. We corner him, we break his lines, and we force him to treat for peace. Ned tried to imagine the marches, the baggage trains, the tens of thousands of men. We'll need to move fast, he said. Better that we travel light, at least until we can join with Hoster Tully's men. If the Lannisters think we're planning a grand invasion from King's Landing, they'll concentrate their defenses on the Gold Road. A northern approach might catch them off guard if we're swift enough. Robert shifted with a grimace. You see why I needed you? Stannis would have overplanned. Renly would have gone about it like a boy vying for attention. You're a soldier, Ned. You and I have led men into the jaws of death and come out triumphant. Ned did not correct him by pointing out that war was never so simple. The realm groaned beneath the weight of another conflict. I will do my best, he said, voice low. But once we commit to this course, there will be no going back. The Lannisters will see it as a direct challenge, eh? It is a direct challenge, Robert cut in, eyes flashing. I won't have the Lannisters nibbling away at my kingdom. If I die in a bed, rotting of this wound or any other, I want the crown secure in my house's name, not overshadowed by Tywin's gold. Ned frowned. There was the crux of it, the children. If Robert died, Joffrey would ascend the throne in name, but the realm would effectively be ruled by the Lannisters. Ned's heart twisted, remembering the old suspicion that gnawed at him, the parentage of the royal children. With Robert still living, that knowledge was more perilous than ever. Perhaps it might be put aside for the present. War was coming. Family secrets could wait. So he bowed his head. I'll see that your will is done, your grace. Robert allowed himself a faint, pained smile. Make me proud, Ned. And for the love you bear me, for the love we both bear Lyanna's memory, crush Tywin before he can ruin us all. The next fortnight sped by in a blur of preparations and urgent dispatches. Ned oversaw the mustering of the king's forces in the Crownlands. Banners bearing the crowned stag of House Baratheon fluttered alongside the dire wolf of House Stark, a sight that made more than one old knight recall the rebellion. The small folk in the outlying villages gawked at the massive columns of men and supply wagons departing King's Landing. Even the gold cloaks contributed some seasoned sergeants to the cause. Cersei Lannister stood on a high balcony in the Red Keep watching the throngs march out. Her face remained impassive, unreadable. No doubt she had relayed every detail to her father by Raven, though the direction of the host's departure might lend confusion. Ned had ordered the main force to feint south for 3 days, then pivot north. With illusions and misinformation fed by Varys, the hope was to keep Tywin uncertain until it was too late. Still, Ned worried. Tywin Lannister had not come to power by underestimating foes. A man cunning enough to orchestrate the sack of King's Landing was cunning enough to sniff out a stratagem. But Ned had his orders from Robert and the needs of the realm pressing upon him. The alternative to wait until Robert fully recovered was unthinkable, for the Lannisters' hold in the west only tightened each day. By the time Ned rode out at the head of the combined forces, he wore the heavy cloak of a commander weighed down by the realm's fortunes. In the seat behind him perched the memories of old battles, crossing the bloody gate with Robert or standing side by side at the Trident. They had triumphed before. The king had faith they would do so again. But House Lannister and House Baratheon were not fresh adversaries like Targaryen loyalists had been in the days of Robert's rebellion. Now they were linked by marriage, by children. War would not only spill blood, it would warp the entire fabric of the realm. Yet that day dawned bright, the sky a clean slate of pale blue, as if the gods were granting Ned Stark a clean start. He and the knights on tall war horses took the lead. Clop, clop, clop echoed down the cobblestones, 100,000 feet following. The city gates swung wide to let them pass. Gold cloaks parted, local people lining the roads to watch the crown's host depart. Some shouted blessings or curses, and Ned felt the weight of their gazes, their hopes, their fears. He rode in silence, gloved hands tight on the reins. The heartbeat of war had begun. Days became a tapestry of dawn marches and dusk encampments. Chilly nights under canvas, men huddled around cook fires, the tang of wood smoke in the air. Scouts galloped in and out bearing news of Lannister outriders or rumored bandit attacks. The ranks were a varied lot, burly knights from the Stormlands, grizzled Crownlanderfoot, brash hedge knights hoping for plunder or renown. Their banners danced and mingled in the wind, a riot of colors, all swearing loyalty to King Robert Baratheon. Ned Stark woke each morning earlier than most, conferring with captains and standing watch as the horizon turned from indigo to pink. He recognized men from the rebellion, older now, their beards streaked with silver. Some recognized him as well, offering respect for the quiet, steadfast way he carried himself. Word spread that the king's hand was personally leading them and that it was at the king's urgent order. Morale remained high. There was a sense of righteousness to the enterprise, at least so it seemed in the early days. With Robert rumored to be out of his sickbed, men believed they'd see the king ride forth soon to join them. But those illusions wore thin as the forced marches pressed on. The pivot north began in earnest after 3 days, just as planned. By the end of the first week, the men's energy was sapped by the punishing schedule. Muddy roads, broken wagons, lost horses. The usual cost of war marched alongside them. Robb Stark, though only a boy of 15 in the original timeline, was not here. He remained in Winterfell in the story's circumstances, so Ned had no immediate kin in the host aside from a retinue of Stark guards. Yet he felt a father's concern for every man in his ranks. Each casualty was like a small sorrow, each death a wound to the realm's body. He grimly hoped that once they reached the Riverlands and joined forces with the Tullus, momentum might shift. At last, near the Trident's wide banks, they found envoys from Riverrun. The Tully bannermen arrived in a swirl of banners: House Mallister's Silver Eagle, House Bracken's Red Stallion, House Blackwood's Dead Weirwood. Their riders brought word that Hoster Tully, though old and ailing, had sent nearly 4,000 men to join the crown's cause. Edmure Tully was commanding them personally. Ned accepted this news with relief. 4,000 was a fraction of what Tywin might field, but it was a substantial addition, especially if the forces from the Stormlands arrived in time. Encamped by the banks of the Trident, Ned met with Edmure under the shade of a battered pavilion. Edmure Tully was ruddy-faced and broad-shouldered, bearing some small resemblance to his sister Catelyn, Ned's wife. At the sight of Ned, Edmure's face lit with an uneasy combination of brotherly warmth and the tension of a realm at war. "Ned," Edmure said, clasping the older man's hand. "It's good to see a friendly face, though I wish we met in better times. My father sends his greetings, albeit from his sickbed." Ned nodded. "Lord Hoster has my respect and gratitude as ever. Your men arrived just in time. I fear Tywin Lannister's outriders may be probing these roads. Have you any word of the Lannisters near Harrenhal?" Edmure's expression darkened. They're there. Harrenhal is well garrisoned. More men poured in from the Westerlands in the last fortnight. We suspect Lord Tywin's main host is somewhere west of the God's Eye, prepared to march on Riverrun at any sign of weakness. Ned considered. If Tywin hunkers at Harrenhal or west of the God's Eye, he might be expecting an assault from the south. But we came north. Perhaps we can slip past his net if we move swiftly along the northern roads to the Red Fork. If we're fortunate, we might force him into an engagement of our choosing. Edmure rapped his knuckles on the rough wooden table. You'll have the Mallisters and the other river lords, though House Frey, he trailed off, scowling. Walder Frey proclaims loyalty as always, but you know the phrase. They shift to where they see the advantage. If Tywin is near the twins, or if he sends a strong enough bribe, the phrase might dither or close their gates to us. Ned frowned. We'll cross that bridge when we come to it, quite literally. The phrase hold the crossing on the Green Fork. I had not planned to cross there, but if we must, we'll see how loyal Walder is when the king's name is invoked. Edmure nodded. He's old and cunning, but he also might fear that if he betrays us, the king would have his head. A night wind swept through the flap of the pavilion, rustling the map Ned had spread. The lines of roads, rivers, and towns were all carefully inked. Little figurines carved from wood represented allied forces, while painted stones indicated possible Lannister positions. Ned stared down at the map for a long moment, feeling the weight of Robert's charge. At first light, he said, pointing at one route, we make for the Red Fork. We'll circumvent Harrenhal from the north. If Tywin remains entrenched in that cursed castle, we ignore him. If he rides out to challenge us, we face him on ground we choose, not the one he's prepared. Edmure Tully folded his arms, assessing. You have the king's blessing to wage a full campaign, I take it? Ned nodded slowly. Yes. Robert recovers in King's Landing, but he put me in command. We must do this swiftly or risk Tywin consolidating further. Time isn't our ally. Edmure offered a tight smile. Then let us pray the gods watch over us, that we march with the righteous cause. Ned only nodded. Righteous or not, the realm would pay in blood. Marching along the Red Fork's meandering path, Ned's host swelled as Riverland lords joined with small retinues. The newly joined men wore battered armor from previous skirmishes, bandages still wrapped around old wounds. They had faced the Mountain and other Lannister marauders. Their haunted eyes told stories of burned villages and slaughtered peasants. Fury simmered beneath the surface. If they got the chance, they would repay the Lannisters in kind. Ned listened to their tales with quiet empathy, disgust twisting his gut. The wanton destruction inflicted by Gregor Clegane's riders was war at its darkest. There were too many widows and orphans now in the Riverlands. Ned vowed to see justice done, though justice in war often meant more blood. At times, the moral burden felt too heavy to bear, but Robert's directive stayed in his mind, crush Tywin. Finally, after nearly a fortnight of maneuver, Ned began receiving urgent scout reports. Lannister outriders sighted to the west, near small hamlets, moving northward. This signaled that Tywin's main force was on the move. If so, the lines on Ned's map would soon converge in a pitched battle. Word had it that Jaime Lannister was with the host, gold armor glinting in the sun, eager to carve a place in history. As the battered columns of the Crown's army wound along the riverbank, Ned organized them into a defensive formation, ensuring they could pivot and form a battle line at a moment's notice. Edmure Tully's men were placed in the center, supported by archers on the flanks. The Stormland Knights, commanded by lords sworn to Robert, were poised for cavalry charges. Ned himself rode among the heavy horse, as was his habit in the rebellion, leading from the front, though he always kept a level head. He found a vantage point on a low rise overlooking a wide plain, flanked by distant stands of trees and the glint of the river beyond. If Tywin meant to approach from the west, Ned's host had chosen ground that would be at least partially defensible, with the slope in their favor and the river at their rear to discourage an encirclement. Morning sun broke over the horizon, illuminating tendrils of mist that curled along the plains. In the hush of dawn, the men rose stiffly, strapped on armor, and drank cold water or hot broth if they were lucky. Horses nickered. Pages readied harnesses and lances. The smell of damp earth hung in the air. By midday, the outriders raced back, breathless, to Ned's command tent. "Lord Stark," one cried, dust coating his face and cloak. "We spotted the Lannister army, thousands upon thousands. They'll be here before sunset." Ned dismissed them with thanks and strode outside. Banners, tents, cooking fires all threatened to vanish in his peripheral vision as he tried to gauge the mood of the men. Anxiety, determination, wariness. Quiet jokes from the veterans, braggadocio from the younger knights. They all awaited the command to form ranks. Edmure Tully rode up beside him, wearing partial plate and a sky-blue cloak pinned with the silver trout of House Tully. His mouth was set in a hard line. "This is it, Ned." Ned nodded. "Form the lines. Pikemen in the front, archers behind. Keep our cavalry on the wings, hidden behind those stands of trees if possible. They must not charge until we see the full shape of the Lannister line." He paused, scanning the horizon. "If Tywin tries to lure us forward, we'll wait. We have the slope. Let him come to us." Edmure signaled to messengers who galloped away. The horns sounded echoing across the field. Men roused themselves, fear and courage swirling in equal measure. Ned Stark mounted his gray warhorse, patting the beast's neck as it snorted. Then he rode along the front ranks, speaking a quiet word here, a calm reassurance there. He was not Robert, who would have roared an inspiring speech or boasted of victory. Ned's style was different, solemn, steady, a father commanding his sons. By late afternoon, the Lannister host appeared on the western horizon, preceded by dust clouds raised by thousands of boots and hoofs. The Golden Lion's standard was unmistakable, as were the bright sigils of various western houses. Lines of spearmen, ranks of crossbowmen, knights in shining steel. At their head, flashing scarlet armor, marched the household guard of the Lannisters, proud in polished plate. And somewhere among them was Tywin, the old lion himself, or possibly Jaime, the Kingslayer, commanding. Ned narrowed his eyes, heart thundering. No matter the commander, this would be a contest of steel and cunning that the realm would remember. Twilight threatened when horns blared from the Lannister side. Their cavalry fanned out, searching for an opening. Their foot came to a halt just out of arrow range. Ned saw standard-bearers moving in attempt to position for an assault. The red glow of the setting sun caught on their armor, turning it the color of fresh blood. Edmure Tully pulled up beside Ned, pointing. "They may wait until dawn, or they may try to probe our lines tonight." Ned's mind raced. "They're uncertain of our numbers. Good. We stay behind the slope for as long as possible. If they want a night assault, they'll pay a steep price." He forced his voice to remain calm. "Send more scouts to guard the flanks. No one sleeps on watch. We stand ready." The men dug in, forming a tight ring of defenses as darkness crept over the land. Torches were lit in strategic clusters, flickering orange. The Lannisters did likewise across the plain, their encampments forming a sea of lights in the distance. A standoff, Ned thought. But the first real blow of this war was imminent. Night was restless. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Ned conferred with captains, passing from one watch post to another. Around midnight, a light drizzle began, tapping on metal helms and tent roofs. Every man who could slept in soggy cloaks, bracing for the clarion call that might come at any moment. But the night passed without a full assault. At dawn, golden light washed over two armies still facing each other across the expanse. Now, Ned observed new movement in the Lannister lines, a stirring of cavalry, ranks shifting like a massive wave. Clearly, Tywin or Jaime had decided that morning was the hour to test the crown's mettle. The horns sounded from the west, followed by a rising clamor, shouts, clashing steel, the drum of hoofs. Lannister horse charged, a wing of knights in gilded armor leading the wedge. Behind them marched ranks of spearmen, crossbowmen. Ned's forces tensed, arrows knocked, pikes lowered. Then the field erupted in chaos. War cries filled the air as the Lannister cavalry smashed into the first ranks of Pike's horses screamed, men toppled, blood spattered across the wet grass. Ned had positioned archers on the flanks, and they loosed volleys of arrows that rained down on the advancing crossbowmen. The air hissed with lethal shafts. Ned found himself in the thick of it, leading the cavalry on the right flank. Through breaks in the melee, he glimpsed the Tully men holding the center, Edmure valiantly rallying them. The Lannisters pressed hard, their numbers formidable, but they had come uphill into prepared defenses. Pikemen braced, archers poured fire. Knights from the Stormlands, bellowing the cry for the king, slammed into the Lannister flank. Steel met steel. Cries of triumph and agony merged. Ned's warhorse galloped into a knot of Lannister foot and Ned's sword flashed, parrying a thrust. He brought the blade down on an exposed collar, felt the jarring impact as metal bit flesh. A guttural scream. Always the worst part of war, hearing a man's death cry. But he pressed on. Again, the swirl of the battle parted, revealing fresh Lannister reinforcements surging forward. Ned realized they meant to break his flank, enveloping the crown's archers. He signaled to a bugler who blew a brassy note. More Stormland knights thundered into the gap, clashing with the oncoming wave. The field turned into a nightmare of churned mud and corpses. Hours later, the sun high overhead, the Lannisters wavered. Their initial charge had faltered against well-prepared defenses. But Ned wasn't blind, he saw that they still had reserves uncommitted. Was Tywin himself holding them back? The cunning old lion would wait to see if Ned had any reserves left. On the crown side, men were exhausted, wounded, battered. Any second wave from the Lannisters might break them. Ned, panting for breath, wiped sweat and mud from his brow. He surveyed the lines, scattered clumps of fighting, with pockets of Crown and Riverland men holding. His captains panted beside him, and the Stormland knights milled about, reforming. Arrows were running short. The command to retrieve arrows from the fallen had gone out 3 times already. The carcasses of horses dotted the battlefield, their eyes glazed. Then a roar arose from behind the Lannister line. At first, Ned feared it signaled a fresh assault. But the voices sounded discordant as though from another army entirely. Suddenly, from a southwestern direction, a mass of mounted knights bearing the stag of Baratheon and the Tyrell Rose of the Reach burst into view, crashing into the Lannister rear. A thunderclap of steel on steel rumbled across the plains as the newly arrived cavalry plowed through unsuspecting Lannister men-at-arms. Ned, startled, realized that reinforcements had arrived far sooner than planned. He glimpsed green and gold banners swirling. Could it be that Mace Tyrell had finally declared for Robert? Or perhaps it was Ser Loras leading a contingent, or even Renly forging an alliance with the Reach behind closed doors. Ned had not been informed that such a force was imminent. But whoever they were, they had timed their arrival to perfection. Trapped in a vice now, Ned's host in front and the new cavalry behind, the Lannister line buckled, confusion spreading. Knights turned to face the new threat, only to be cut down by arrows from Ned's archers. A lethal pincer began to form, and the Lannister command struggled to hold cohesion. In the midst of that chaos, Ned spurred his horse forward, rallying his battered lines. "Advance," he shouted. "Push them back." Trumpets and horns echoed the command. Tully men surged up from the center. Stormland knights regrouped and charged again. They met less resistance now, for the Lannisters' formation was compromised. The field turned into a swirling mass of gold and crimson banners falling or retreating. One final stand was made by a unit of Lannister knights near a rise, but they were overwhelmed by the unstoppable combined press of Ned's men from the east and the mysterious cavalry from the west. Finally, as the sun moved past its zenith, the Lannisters broke. They routed in confusion, fleeing for the distant wood lines or the uncertain safety of the roads west. Ned reined in his horse, surveying the carnage with a hollow feeling. Victorious, but at what cost? The ground was littered with bodies, moaning wounded. The stench of gore. War always demanded a high price. He tore his gaze away, focusing on the mounted knights who had saved the day. They wore no unified sigil except that some bore House Tyrell's golden rose, while others displayed the crowned stag of Baratheon. The truth struck Ned. Renly must have gone to Highgarden and forged an alliance in Robert's name. He guided his mount forward to greet their commander. The cavalry parted, and through them rode Renly Baratheon, looking both triumphant and cautious. His armor was polished, the antlered helm held at his side. Beside him rode the Knight of Flowers, Loras Tyrell, slender and elegant even in battered plate. Around them, the men cheered, brandishing swords and lances. They had turned the tide in a single stroke. "My lord brother's hand," Renly called, reining in as he approached Ned. "You look like you've been through the 7 hells." Ned gave a curt smile, too drained to muster a flourish. "We have, Lord Renly, but you came at the perfect hour. Your arrival may have saved us from a desperate struggle." Renly dismounted gracefully. He pressed a fist to his breastplate. "When I learned from Mace Tyrell that he would ally with Robert if assured of certain concessions and favors, I saw a chance to ride north and join you. We left Highgarden weeks ago, moving swiftly. I had thought we might arrive too late." He glanced at the carnage. "It seems we arrived just in time." Ned nodded. "You have my thanks as well as the king's. He'll be grateful for this. Where is Tywin Lannister?" Renly shook his head. "Not on the field. Jaime was here, I think, but I never caught sight of him. He likely retreated. Or perhaps we'll find him among the captured. The Lannisters' lines were in utter disarray when we smashed them." Wordlessly, Ned dismounted and began weaving through the aftermath. The living scrambled to help the wounded. Tents were hastily erected to serve as field hospitals. The smell of blood and excrement was overwhelming. Groans and screams of the dying would likely haunt the night. But amid this horror, there was a sense of vindication on the men's faces. They had struck a blow against Tywin's might. Edmure Tully rode up on a foam-flecked horse, sweat plastering his hair to his brow. His cheeks were streaked with mud, but he grinned at Ned. "We did it, Lord Stark. Or rather, these new allies did it. They arrived and hammered the Lannisters' flank. They're in full retreat." Ned placed a hand on Edmure's shoulder. "And we owe you gratitude as well, Edmure. Your men held the center bravely. Let's see to your wounded." With grim efficiency, Ned assigned men to gather the fallen, set watch for any Lannister remnants, and begin the heart-wrenching task of identifying bodies. He found time to speak with Renly once more before nightfall. They stood near a makeshift table, the map battered and bloodstained. Torches cast flickering shadows. Renly was in high spirits, though he tempered it around Ned. Loras Tyrell, silent but watchful, listened at his side. Renly reported, "With this victory, the road west lies open to us. Tywin's forces will need time to regroup. We can press into the Westerlands if we wish or follow them south if they pivot that way." Ned sighed wearily. "We must be cautious. This was a pitched battle, but Tywin's main strength may not have been fully committed. He'll have more men perhaps at Harrenhal or deeper in the Westerlands. If we overextend, we could be trapped." Renly nodded, conceding the point. "Agreed. At least for now, the threat to Riverrun is lifted. We could fortify our position, demand Tywin come to the table. With the combined forces of the Riverlands, the Crownlands, the Stormlands, and now part of the Reach, our advantage grows daily." Ned stared at the map, mind churning. Robert wanted a swift end. If Tywin is forced to negotiate, that might secure the realm. Yet I wonder if he'll ever bend, especially if he thinks Robert is still weak. Renly's expression hardened. Robert is no longer on his deathbed. Word of that alone might change the game. He glanced at Ned. "You know what else might force Tywin's hand?" He placed a finger on Casterly Rock. "If we march on his ancestral seat, threaten it directly, that might bring him to heel." Ned almost winced. "Potentially. But that means crossing through the heart of the Westerlands with supply lines to maintain and Tywin's forces harrying us at every turn. Many more would die." He trailed off. "Let's see if we can end this with negotiation. We hold the advantage now. Perhaps we can offer terms, though not so generous that Tywin remains a threat." Renly exchanged a glance with Loras Tyrell, who gave a small nod. "We follow your lead, Lord Stark," Renly said. "Robert named you commander for a reason. Still, keep in mind that some among us, especially the Riverlords, crave vengeance. They might not accept a truce if it means letting Tywin go unpunished." Ned pinched the bridge of his nose, feeling the weight of the realm. "Justice can be done. But the realm's unity is paramount. We cannot allow another war to break out in a year's time. Tywin must be checked thoroughly." With that agreement, they parted to oversee the night's tasks. The howls of the wounded and the soft prayers of the living underscored the reality of victory's price. Word reached King's Landing within days, a resounding triumph for the royal host. The Lannisters had been routed, their attempt to break Ned Stark's forces thwarted by the timely arrival of Renly's combined Stormlandreach cavalry. King Robert Baratheon, still in the Red Keep, was said to have roared with laughter upon hearing of the victory. Against the advice of his healers, he even rose from bed and insisted on drinking toasts with any man who brought fresh tidings of Ned's success. Cersei Lannister, pale and grim, could do little to dampen the celebratory mood that erupted in the city once news spread. She retreated behind her closed doors, sending frantic ravens westward. Some whispered that she visited the royal sept to pray for her father's safety. The palace gossips devoured each new scrap of rumor, uncertain how Tywin would respond or whether Jaime Lannister had survived the rout. Meanwhile, in the battered battlefield encampment, Ned Stark conferred with his subcommanders. Reinforcements were still trickling in. Raven messages flew back and forth. The question loomed: press deeper into Lannister territory to force a decisive surrender, or hold ground and open negotiations? Renly insisted on a show of strength, but Ned, reluctant to shed more blood, sent peace feelers first. He penned letters addressed to Tywin Lannister, urging him to lay down arms in exchange for lenient terms. He wrote with Robert's authority: surrender or face the realm's might. He also mentioned that Robert had survived his wound, was recovering quickly, and that the crown would not be cowed by further Lannister aggression. Days passed without reply. Scouts returned with conflicting reports. Some saw small Lannister bands moving west, others heard rumors that Tywin had fallen back to the Golden Tooth or that he was rallying fresh levies somewhere near Castamir's old ruins. The uncertainty gnawed at Ned. They could not camp in the Riverlands forever. His men needed supplies, rest, a secure foothold. At last, a formal envoy arrived. The man bore the lion's sigil on a fine cloak, though he lacked any heraldic illusions of grandeur. He introduced himself as Ser Davain Lannister, a distant cousin to Tywin. He was received in Ned's command tent under heavy guard. Renly and Loras Tyrell were present, as were Edmure Tully and several other lords. Ser Davain spoke carefully, eyes flicking from one stern-faced to another. "My lord father, Tywin Lannister, does not yield easily, but he will consider terms if the crown is prepared to show respect. He wishes to ensure that House Lannister's honor remains intact." Edmure Tully scoffed. "After all the raids, rapes, and murders in the Riverlands, he worries about his honor? The man has none." Davain reddened but pressed on. "Nonetheless, Lord Tywin acknowledges he has suffered a defeat. He requests safe passage to negotiate directly with Lord Eddard Stark, representing King Robert's interest, at a neutral site of your choosing." He paused, eyes flicking to the imposing form of Renly, who was clad in partial armor even at this meeting. "If the king is able to attend, so much the better, but if not, Lord Tywin wants assurance that any agreement will carry the king's signature." Ned inclined his head. "We shall consider it. But let your lord father know the outrages inflicted upon the small folk cannot be excused by talk of honor. If he wishes to negotiate, he must come prepared to answer for them." Davain swallowed. "I will relay the message, my lord." Ned steepled his fingers. "Suggest we meet at the Inn of the Kneeling Man, near the crossing at the Trident. It is relatively untouched by the war. Choose a date in the next fortnight, no more than that. And inform Lord Tywin that we will accept no double dealings. If he tries any trick, if Jaime or his riders assault our envoys, we will finish what was started on that battlefield." Davain bowed stiffly, backing away. "As you command, Lord Stark." Outside, after the envoy departed, a clamor of discussion arose among Ned's war council. Edmure wanted Tywin's head on a spike. Renly urged caution but was open to further battle if it would rid them of Lannister menace once and for all. Loras Tyrell said little, though Ned suspected he leaned toward showing no mercy. The Tully bannermen, still nursing fresh scars of Lannister aggression, clamored for vengeance. Ned, however, recalled Robert's directive to end the threat swiftly. More war would tear the realm asunder, cause more peasant deaths, more famine, more chaos. If a negotiated settlement could muzzle Tywin, it might be the best route, especially with Robert's uncertain health back in King's Landing. So Ned insisted on sending back a formal acceptance of the proposed negotiations. The next 10 days felt as tense as a drawn bowstring. Skirmishes flared at the fringes of the Riverlands, but overall the Lannisters seemed to be withdrawing or lying low. Ned marched his host slowly north to the designated inn along the Trident, fortifying it as a meeting site. He had watchers all around, archers in the woods, men patrolling the roads. If Tywin tried duplicity, they would respond in kind. Finally, on the appointed day, 2 small entourages approached. From the west came Tywin Lannister, riding in a gilt carriage with a handful of red-cloaked knights on horseback. Beside him, his plate gleaming, rode Jaime Lannister, the Kingslayer, face stony. They crossed the shallow part of the Trident, ignoring the suspicious glares of Edmure's men. From the east, accompanied by a small retinue in the Baratheon livery, came the king himself, Robert Baratheon. He had insisted on traveling with a small guard to make an appearance. By the pale set of his face and the way he grimaced at every bump in the road, Ned could tell the journey had been painful. But Robert had always been stubborn. Ned waited outside the inn's entrance, helmet in his hand. When he saw Robert step stiffly from his carriage, he strode forward, bending to one knee. "Your Grace." Robert, breath-labored, pulled Ned to his feet. "Enough of that, old friend. Stand. I'm not so weak as to need you prostrate before me." He glanced around, seeing the disquieted stares of the men. "Well, where's the old lion?" At that moment, Tywin Lannister emerged from his own conveyance. He wore rich velvets and carried himself with icy dignity despite his humiliating defeat in the field. Jaime stood just behind him, the golden hair of the Kingslayer bright in the sun. Many eyes flicked warily to Jaime's sword. But Tywin stepped forward, ignoring everyone else, and offered a stiff bow to King Robert. "Your Grace," Tywin said, voice cool. "I am pleased to see you so recovered. The realm rejoices in your health." Robert rumbled a half-laugh. "I doubt they all rejoice, Lord Tywin. Some of them might have hoped I was in my grave." His eyes flicked to Jaime, but he said nothing of the father's or son's rumored plots. Instead, he waved a hand. "Let's go inside. We talk under a roof or not at all." They entered the large common room of the inn, which Ned's men had cleared of all but the most essential furnishings. A single wooden table stood in the center, ringed by benches. Guards posted at the doors. Windows opened to the summer air. The smell of old ale and fresh rushes mingled in the hush. Ned took a seat beside Robert while Tywin and Jaime sat across from them. Renly hovered behind Robert, arms folded. Barrist and Selmy, white cloak swirling, stood watchful as ever behind the king's shoulder. Robert broke the silence first, speaking as though addressing a recalcitrant child. "Your men attacked the Riverlands, Tywin, sowing terror, burning villages. The realm can't abide such lawlessness. Then you raised an army and marched against my hand only to meet defeat." His tone hardened. "If you seek peace, speak plainly." Tywin's green eyes flashed, but he maintained composure. "I do not deny that matters have escalated, Your Grace. But it was never my intention to make war on the crown. The raid stemmed from unresolved disputes with certain river lords. My men might have exceeded my orders in their zeal." Jaime's lip curled at that, but Tywin pressed on. "We do not question your authority or that of Lord Stark. However, my house cannot endure open hostility forever. We propose a cessation of hostilities in exchange for certain guarantees." "Guarantees?" Robert asked, arching a brow. Tywin spread his hands. "Assurances that House Lannister's rightful place at court remains secure. That my grandchildren's succession will remain unchallenged. That the debts owed to the Iron Throne do not hamper House Lannister's financial well-being. And that retribution for any perceived crimes in the Riverlands be handled in a just manner, not a partisan trial." Robert let out a scoffing huff. "You want my promise that I won't punish you for almost plunging the realm into civil war?" His voice rose, echoing in the rafters. "You want me to say that your men can butcher peasants and you'll escape scot-free because your precious Lannister name stands above the law?" Jaime's hand moved toward his sword hilt, but Tywin shot him a quelling glance. Then Tywin looked Robert in the eye. "I am not above the law, Your Grace. But we both know what the realm truly needs, stability. If we tear each other apart, the Iron Throne will be weaker, not stronger." Ned, who had listened silently, spoke up now, his voice low and steady. "And what would House Lannister do in exchange for these guarantees?" Tywin inclined his head to Ned. "We will withdraw our forces from the Riverlands. Pay reparations to those lords who have suffered. A formal apology if that is what it takes." He paused. "But the children, Joffrey, Myrcella, and Tommen must remain unchallenged. They are royal blood, heirs to the Iron Throne. Their future and that of House Lannister must be safeguarded." Silence. A nerve jumped in Robert's jaw. Ned's mind recalled the secret that gnawed at him. Cersei's children were not Robert's. But was this the moment to reveal it, to break the realm once more? Robert was alive, ironically making the truth about Joffrey's parentage even more dangerous. For an instant, Ned's pulse hammered, uncertain. Robert shifted, grimacing from pain. "You make it sound as though you do me a favor by withdrawing from the Riverlands. If I wanted, I could muster half the realm and burn Casterly Rock to the ground." Tywin sat impassive. "You could try, Your Grace, but the cost in lives would be immense. House Lannister is not so weak as to surrender without a fight. Many in the realm would think twice before endorsing the further destruction of resources and commerce." War is expensive, draining. There are other threats to consider, across the narrow sea, for instance. His gaze flicked meaningfully. Surely you would prefer to keep the realm united. Ned's eyes flicked to Robert, who looked torn between rage and weariness. The king's wound was still healing, and the realm's finances were in a precarious state. A protracted war against the Lannisters, even if winnable, would be catastrophic. Refugees, famine, a fractured feudal structure. Memories of the rebellion came unbidden. How entire villages had starved, how men who survived the war returned to find their homes burned. Robert exhaled, deflating slightly. All right, Tywin, you want me to promise that your line remains unchallenged? That I won't string you up for your little war? That you get to keep your seat as Warden of the West? He turned to Ned. What do you think, old friend? Have we spilled enough blood? Ned's throat felt tight. He looked from Tywin's implacable face to Jaime's tense posture, then to Renly, who stood by with obvious distaste. If Ned insisted on total vengeance, war would continue. If he agreed to Tywin's terms, the Riverlands would see some compensation but no real justice for the atrocities. And House Lannister would remain dangerously close to the throne. Yet Robert was king, and the burdens of rulership demanded hard choices. Ned recalled the vow he'd made to safeguard Robert's reign, to keep peace in the realm. Perhaps the realm's peace demanded that Tywin pay gold instead of blood. In a voice that carried the weight of finality, Ned said, the king must decide. But from my perspective, a realm at peace is preferable to a realm at war. If House Lannister pays restitution to the Riverlords, publicly apologizes, withdraws every man from the Riverlands, and ceases all aggression, that might suffice. We will hold them accountable if they break the peace again. Tywin dipped his head fractionally. That is acceptable. As a sign of goodwill, I will see to the immediate disbanding of my armies east of the Golden Tooth. Robert gripped the edge of the table, breathing heavily. Pain flickered across his broad features, but he ground out his words. Fine. We have an accord, Tywin. But mark me, if I see even a whiff of treachery, I will personally see you dragged to King's Landing in chains. Are we clear? Tywin bowed more deeply. Perfectly clear, Your Grace. The final terms were hammered out: gold to be paid, hostages to ensure compliance, the immediate release of any Riverland prisoners, and a public condemnation of the raids. Both sides would remain watchful, but a precarious peace had been brokered. Ned could not help feeling a hollow sense of dissatisfaction. He had wanted to see Gregor Clegane and the other marauders answer for their crimes. Perhaps in time, justice would be served. In the days that followed, the two entourages departed with minimal fanfare. Tywin and Jaime rode west, presumably to disband the battered remains of their host. Robert returned to King's Landing, proclaiming victory. Ned Stark oversaw the slow dismantling of the war camp, sending men home or reassigning them to keep watch over critical crossings. The Riverlords were promised restitution, though gold would never restore the lives lost. Renly parted ways soon after, riding south to facilitate the new alliance with the Tyrells. There was talk of future marriages or feasts, an effort to rebuild bridges. Loras Tyrell made a quiet, polite farewell, though Ned wondered if the young knight yearned for more glory in the field. The realm breathed a collective sigh, uncertain whether it had just avoided a cataclysm or merely postponed one. For his part, Ned Stark traveled to Riverrun to see Lord Hoster Tully, paying respects to his wife's father. He delivered condolences for the Riverlands' suffering, promised the king's mercy for the wounded, and tried to smooth relations with the proud Riverlords. They accepted the compensation, but the tension remained. House Lannister's gold might soothe some wounds, yet old grudges lingered. Still, the immediate crisis had passed. Tywin had been outflanked, forced to the negotiating table. Robert Baratheon still wore the crown, still clung to life. The realm began to settle, if only for the moment. In the months that followed, the efforts to rebuild overshadowed all else. Ned Stark returned to King's Landing at Robert's behest. A new wave of politicking awaited him. Cersei's cold fury simmered behind every courtesy, while Pycelle droned about the treasury's deficits. Peter Baelish busied himself with reorganizing loans, ensuring the crown could meet the obligations promised to the Riverlands. Varys quietly hinted at rumors from across the narrow sea, suggesting that while the realm quarreled internally, Daenerys Targaryen grew in the east. Robert, though still not fully recovered, took a renewed interest in governance. Perhaps the brush with death and the near-civil war had awakened him to his duties. He conferred with Ned daily, approving edicts to restore farmland in the Riverlands, sending out sworn swords to track down brigands. Some nights he even sat in the small council chamber without a goblet of wine, an impressive feat for the once prolific drinker. Yet, behind the facade of normalcy, the realm's divisions persisted. House Lannister had suffered a blow, but they were far from broken. Jaime still commanded influence as Lord Commander of the King Guard, though his father had retreated to Casterly Rock for the moment. The Queen was often absent from the royal dinners, citing ill health. Joffrey, Myrcella, and Tommen paraded around the courtyard, with Cersei ensuring they remained visible as the rightful heirs. The question of their true parentage lay like a dagger in Ned's mind, yet Robert was alive, and perhaps none would dare challenge Joffrey's lineage as long as the king's dominion held firm. One evening, Robert and Ned stood atop the battlements overlooking Blackwater Bay. The sun dipped low, painting the water orange. Gulls cried overhead, and a warm breeze caressed them. Robert leaned heavily on the stone parapet, hand pressed to his bandaged side. His face, bearded and rugged, looked more contemplative than Ned had seen in years. He cast Ned a sidelong glance. "I never thank you properly," he grunted, voice low. "For leading the army, for giving Tywin a good thrashing. For saving my throne." Ned shook his head. "You named me hand to serve the realm, Robert. We were both younger men once, and we did what had to be done then. We're older now, but the duty remains the same." A sad, fond smile touched Robert's lips. "Duty, right? Sometimes I wonder if all the fighting back then was simpler. Aerys Targaryen was mad. Rhaegar was an enemy on the field. We had no choice but to rise against them." He exhaled, squinting out over the bay. "But you're right, duty doesn't end. It only grows heavier." Ned's voice was quiet. "Will you be able to keep the peace with the Lannisters under your roof?" Robert barked a humorless laugh. "Cersei is not the forgiving sort, but what can she do now? Her father's sword arm is weakened. She'll bide her time, I'm sure, but I'll watch her carefully. If I smell treason again..." He trailed off, gaze drifting to the watery horizon. Ned nodded, his heart heavy. Both men knew that the lines had been drawn too clearly. The Lannisters would wait for a moment of weakness, and House Baratheon would remain vigilant. The next blow might come from another quarter, or perhaps from within. But for now, at least, the realm was spared the devastation of a full-scale war. They stood in companionable silence until the sun dipped below the water, leaving a violet hue in the sky. Eventually, Robert turned away, wincing at the movement. "Come, Ned. I'm told there's a feast tonight to celebrate the signing of the new trade agreements with the Reach. We'd best not keep Mace Tyrell waiting, blowhard though he is." Ned offered a wan smile. "After you, your grace." They descended the steps into the torchlit corridors of the Red Keep, bound for the great hall where lords and ladies gathered in silks and satins. Servants bowed as they passed. The realm's pageantry was on full display, as if no one remembered the fresh scars of war. But Ned did. He remembered every lost life, every wounded soldier's grimace, every tear shed in burned villages. Still, the immediate threat had passed. The king had recovered from his wound, and Ned had led the royal army to victory, outflanking Tywin Lannister's gambit. A fragile peace settled over the Seven Kingdoms. Whether it would last was another question entirely. In a land where old grudges ran deep and new intrigues sprang up like weeds, the only certainty was that winter would come, in one form or another. As Ned walked behind Robert toward the throne room, he thought of the direwolves of the north. Patient, resolute, and always watchful. He prayed the realm, like a resolute wolf pack, would endure whatever storms lay ahead. For now, at least, they had prevailed. And for the moment, that would have to be enough. The days that followed Robert's tentative reconciliation with Tywin Lannister seemed, at first glance, almost serene, like the uneasy calm after a great storm. The Red Keep resumed its daily rhythms, bustling with the business of governance, peppered with the usual gossip, and lit each evening by 1,000 candles and torches. Birds fluttered from rookery to rookery, bearing letters to every corner of Westeros. In the throne room, the king's court filled daily with petitioners, supplicants, and the ever-present swirl of courtiers, each jockeying for position. But beneath the surface calm, tensions and secrets wove themselves into a tapestry that threatened to unravel at the slightest tug. Eddard Stark felt this tension with every breath. He found himself haunted by the memory of war's aftermath, the blood-soaked fields where Stormlanders and Tully men lay side by side with Lannister soldiers. He had buried enough men to fill an entire generation. Now, he and Robert had hammered out an uneasy truce with Tywin, hoping to spare the realm another wave of violence. Yet the question gnawed at him: how long would it last? A realm was not a stable edifice of stone and mortar, but a delicate weaving of loyalties, alliances, bargains, and fears. A day after the king's return to the Red Keep, Ned stood in the solar adjoining his private quarters, gazing out over the city. King's Landing sprawled below him, 1,000 slate roofs, winding cobblestone alleys, the distant shimmer of Blackwater Bay. At this hour, the early morning sun cast the rooftops in golden light, though the stench from the lower wards remained pungent as ever. The city pulsed with life, oblivious that war had nearly come to its gates. A rap on the door startled him from his reverie. He recognized the voice of Jory Castle outside, his loyal captain of guards. Ned beckoned him in. Jory entered with a brisk bow. He appeared more worn than usual, his shoulders tight, the lines of worry etched around his eyes. "My lord," Jory said, "Ser Barristan is here to see you." Ned turned. "Show him in." A moment later, Ser Barristan Selmy of the King's Guard crossed the threshold with calm dignity. He wore no armor at this hour, just a simple white tunic and breeches, the white cloak draped over a shoulder. Even so, he carried himself with the quiet gravity that had earned him his legendary name, Barristan the Bold. His silver hair and lined face belied the depth of his skill and experience. "My Lord Hand," Barristan said, inclining his head. "I bring a message from His Grace. He has requested your presence at midday in the small council chamber. There is to be a discussion of what to do with the Riverlands now that Tywin's men have officially withdrawn." Ned nodded. "Yes, of course. Have you any notion of the king's thoughts on the matter?" Barristan allowed a subtle frown. "He is uncertain. Though the war is halted, many of the Riverlords still clamor for harsher punishment. The Tullists demand that Gregor Clegane and his men be turned over for trial. Lord Tywin, by all reports, has quietly returned to Casterly Rock, which begs the question of whether we can truly hold the perpetrators to account. The king wants your counsel." Ned's mouth tightened. "I will give it." "Thank you, Ser Barristan." Barristan bowed again. "Then, if it pleases you, I'll leave you to your preparations." When the Kingsguard knight departed, Ned exhaled slowly. He had expected something like this. The roads of the Riverlands were still pocked with blackened ruins, and grief hung over them like a pall. Neither the Lannisters' gold nor their half-hearted apologies could truly mend the wounds. But if the crown began rounding up every Lannister soldier or retainer who had ridden through the Riverlands, the peace might shatter anew. Balancing the realm's thirst for justice with the need for stability was precisely the cruel puzzle that weighed on a king's hand. He left the solar, passing through the corridor to check on his own household. Winterfell men had come south with him, Jory, Vayan Poole, Desmond, and others. Some tended the daily tasks, others idled about, wishing for the clean air of the north. Ned greeted them quietly, offering small words of thanks for their service. Their presence reminded him that though he was the king's hand, he was first and always a Stark of Winterfell. One day, if the gods allowed, he would return to the north, watch over his own lands in peace. But that day seemed distant indeed. At midday, Ned made his way to the small council chamber. The cavernous hallway leading there was lit by iron sconces and crowded with courtiers awaiting small errands of state. The king's guard at the door parted, admitting him. Inside, the table was half filled with familiar faces. Grand Maester Pycelle was there, stooped and hawk-nosed, engrossed in a ledger. Peter Baelish, Littlefinger, sat with his sly smile, finger-tapping at a wine goblet. Renly Baratheon had recently returned from the Reach, evidently to resume his duties on the small council, and he lounged in his seat with an air of casual confidence. Lord Varys hovered at the far side, in flowing silk robes, a ring of keys at his waist. And at the head of the table, in a high-backed chair that dwarfed him somewhat, sat King Robert Baratheon. Though he was out of bed, Robert still looked pallid. The huntsman's vigor that once defined him had ebbed. Even his voice, when he greeted Ned, sounded grated by pain. Yet there was steel in his dark blue eyes. He wore a thick belt around his midsection, partly to steady his bandaged ribs, and the royal circlet sat slightly askew on his black hair flecked with more silver than before. "Sit, Ned," Robert commanded. "We have business." Ned slipped into the seat at Robert's right hand. A hush fell as the king cast his gaze around at the assembled counselors. Outside, gulls shrieked over the bay, but in this chamber, tension hummed like a drawn bowstring. Robert folded his thick arms. "We're here to discuss the aftermath of the Lannister incursion. Tywin has pulled his men out, that much is done. But the outrages remain. Edmure Tully is in King's Landing this very day, petitioning for justice and gold to rebuild what was lost. We've offered him coin, but he wants the crown to press charges against the Mountain, that monstrous bastard Gregor Clegane, and the other brigands. I would see Gregor's head on a spike for all this, but Tywin refuses to hand him over." Grand Maester Pycelle cleared his throat. Your Grace, if I may. House Clegane has long served House Lannister, but they are not impossible to oust. However, I would urge caution. Lord Tywin has shown good faith in negotiating a peace. We must avoid reopening wounds. A formal indictment might. Robert's fist slammed the table. A formal indictment? The man slaughtered peasants and outraged half the Riverlands. We have lords crying for blood. Justice must be seen to be done, or else what good is my crown? Ned broke in quietly. Your Grace, you know my mind on this. The mountain's crimes cannot be swept away by talk of peace. Innocent folk died. The realm will not soon forget. Baelish's cunning green eyes slid between them. Yes, but if you openly name Gregor Clegane an outlaw and demand his arrest, that's another slight against Tywin. Peace might unravel. He paused, letting his voice drop to a near whisper. We can seek the mountain's head by less direct means. There are always ways to rid the realm of a troublesome rabid dog without making a public spectacle. A large bounty, for instance. Plenty of bounty hunters would relish that, no? A faint sneer crossed Renly's lips. A hush-hush arrangement to kill Gregor? That might please the families he wronged, but it still reeks of underhandedness. Robert shrugged, grimacing at the pain in his side. Underhanded or not, if it solves the problem, he let the thought linger. We cannot please everyone, but I'll be thrice cursed if I let that beast roam free. The next time House Lannister feels slighted, they might unleash him again. Varys stepped forward, the sound of his soft slippers muted on the stone floor. He clasped his plump hands. If your Grace wishes, my little birds could spread word in the appropriate circles. A rumor that the crown itself offers 1,000 dragons for the mountain's head could circulate quite swiftly. It would require no official edict, only the right whispers. Soon enough, every hedge knight from Dorne to the Wall would try to claim the prize. Baelish's grin curved. 1,000 dragons might be a tad high, Lord Varys. We have books to balance. But you catch the spirit of the thing. Give them enough incentive, and nature will run its course. Robert's eyes flicked from Varys to Ned, searching for an anchor. Ned, I hate all this sneaking about, but if it gets rid of Gregor without Tywin's open defiance, is that not a better path than an ugly confrontation? Ned's jaw clenched. Part of me rebels against the notion of buying an assassin to do the realm's justice. But justice is justice. If the mountain never stands trial, at least he can be ended before he kills more innocents. He expelled a breath. I only wish we could do it openly in the light. Robert's expression softened into something like apology. We all do, old friend, but we live in the real world, not the one we'd prefer. He shifted his weight, pressing a hand to his bandaged side. Then he looked around the table, as if seeking final confirmations. Very well. Varys, see that word goes out discreetly. Put a price on Gregor's head. Make it large enough that men will scramble to find him. Varys bowed. As you command, your Grace. Grand Maester Pycelle coughed politely. That addresses one concern. But what of Edmure Tully's demand for further reparations? He claims that simply paying gold to rebuild roads is insufficient. He wants the crown to finance the restoration of entire villages, and he insists that Tywin do the same. Renly rolled his eyes. Tywin will never send a copper more than what he's already pledged. He'll claim the peace treaty settled the matter of reparations, which included the sum he agreed to. Trying to wring more from him would be a fool's errand. Baelish sked. We do, however, have some discretionary coffers. If we release it in the form of crown grants, say, to the Tullys, they can direct it as they see fit. A gesture of goodwill, encouraging them to remain loyal. Cheaper in the long run than risking them turning bitter, wouldn't you say? Pycelle nodded vigorously. Wise, yes. A stable Riverlands means stable trade routes, which serve the realm. Robert groaned. Fine. Make it so, but keep the sums reasonable, Littlefinger. I have no desire to bankrupt the treasury just to soothe Edmure's pride. Littlefinger gave a shallow bow. Of course, your Grace. I'll craft the necessary arrangements and present them to the Master of Laws for final approval. Ned inclined his head, satisfied that at least some tangible aid would reach the Riverlands. His only regret was that it still felt paltry compared to what the people had lost. Nonetheless, the meeting moved on, shifting to other matters: pirates harrying the coast of the Stepstones, a dispute over grain shipments in the Reach, whispers that Dorne might be bristling at the new alliances with Highgarden. Ned listened carefully, offering measured input when asked. The entire time, though, he felt an undercurrent of watchfulness from the men at the table, as if each expected the next betrayal, the next crisis, any day now. When at last the council adjourned, Robert rose unsteadily and beckoned Ned to walk with him. Renly moved to help, but Robert waved him off, preferring Ned's shoulder for support. The corridors of the Red Keep felt narrower with the king leaning so heavily. Ned could sense the pain Robert tried to mask, each step costing him an effort. They reached a quiet alcove near a series of windows that overlooked the interior gardens. There, Robert let out a long exhale. Gods, Ned, the stabbed wound won't let me be. Feels like a red-hot knife twisting in my side whenever I move. He grimaced. Maester says I'll recover fully, but I wonder if I'll ever be the man I was. Ned rested a hand gently on Robert's arm, concern flickering in his gray eyes. You survived a mortal wound. Give yourself time. The realm can't afford to lose you. Robert chuckled grimly. So it seems. If the boar had gored me a few inches deeper, you'd be wrestling with all this alone. Or else Tywin would be crowning Joffrey in a fortnight. His voice hardened. That's the other matter, Ned. Joffrey. Ned tensed. He recalled that old secret, the one he'd guarded so carefully. He had discovered, through long observation, that none of Cersei's children bore the Baratheon black hair or deep blue eyes. He had strong suspicions they were Jaime's bastards. But with Robert alive, unlike the original path where Robert was dying, Ned had never confronted him with that damning evidence. Perhaps it was for the realm's good that it stayed buried. Perhaps. Robert's brow furrowed. He's grown so vain. So cruel in small ways. I catch him tormenting the squires or lording his status over younger boys in the yard. Tommen is different, a sweet boy, but Joffrey. He worries me. He rubbed a hand over his bristly beard. If anything should happen to me, the realm would pass to him. Is that wise? Ned's stomach sank. He's your heir, your grace. By law and custom, no one would gainsay it. Robert let out a bitter sigh. By law, yes. But a father sees things in a son's eyes. No sense of honor, no sense of duty. A thirst for power, for cruelty. If I had died from that boar's tusk, I can't help but think the realm would have been in chaos the moment Joffrey took the throne. Tywin would have shaped him into a perfect little tyrant. Or Cersei would have. He pressed his lips together. I've tried to talk to him to teach him better ways, but it's as if he's deaf to me. Ned hesitated. He could almost speak the truth that Joffrey was not Robert's son at all, that the king had no blood tie to the boy. But once that knowledge was out, the realm would fracture anew. Robert might order the boy executed or at least disinherited. The Lannisters would rise in revolt. War would blaze hotter than before. And in the midst of it all, thousands of small folk would die again. Gently, Ned said, he's still young, Robert. 14 name days. Boys can change with time and guidance. If you remain vigilant, perhaps he'll learn. And you have other children, Myrcella and Tommen are, by all accounts, kinder. Tommen especially might yet grow into a good man. Robert nodded, though his lips twisted. Aye. But a king's firstborn son is the heir, not the second or the third. Let's hope your prayers for Joffrey's better nature are answered. He pushed away from the wall with a grunt. Come, help me get to my chambers. The day's dealings have sapped me. There's a feast in the hall tonight in honor of Mace Tyrell's new trade agreements, and I fear I'll need all my wits about me if I'm to keep from strangling that pompous fool. Ned forced a small smile. We'll endure it together. They parted ways at the door to the royal apartments. Ned's mind spun with Robert's words, the old tension about Joffrey's parentage reignited. Perhaps it was best left unsaid for now. The realm needed stability, and any revelation would ignite a powder keg. Still, the weight of deception hung like a sword over all their heads. That evening, he attended the feast. True to Robert's fears, Mace Tyrell was in high spirits, boasting of Highgarden's bountiful harvests and grander tournaments to come. The great lords in attendance wore shining finery, their ladies decked in jewels. Musicians strummed lively tunes, jugglers and fire-eaters performed, and servants brought roast boar, honeyed duck, spiced wine. The great hall bustled with chatter and laughter, but Ned noticed how the laughter felt forced in many corners. Everyone knew the realm had come perilously close to civil war. They wanted distraction and merriment to forget that knowledge. Cersei Lannister sat at the king's side as always. She looked radiant in a green silk gown, emeralds glittering at her throat, her golden hair swept up in an elaborate style. Yet her expression was flat, her gaze traveling over the revelers with a queenly aloofness that bordered on disdain. When Robert tried to speak to her, she answered in cool, clipped phrases, never meeting his eyes for more than a heartbeat. No one at court missed the tension between them. Yet none dared speak of it openly. Joffrey was present too, perched near the dais. He wore a black velvet doublet embroidered with golden thread, and his face bore a constant sneer. He smirked at the minstrel's performance and gave mocking applause for the jugglers. Myrcella and Tommen sat at his side, the girl quiet, the boy blinking at the spectacle with a sort of innocent wonder. One or two times, Ned saw Joffrey flick a crumb at Tommen's face, smirking, but Tommen only laughed uncertainly, as if not sure whether it was a joke or a slight. Ned could almost sense Robert's frustration from across the dais. As the feast continued, lords toasted the realm's peace. Edmure Tully was recognized for his efforts in the Riverlands, as was Renly for forging alliances in the Reach. Renly gave a short speech praising his brother's leadership, though Ned could see glances and half-smiles from those who knew Robert had been confined to bed while Ned led the armies. Still, official history would spin it in the crown's favor. The king had orchestrated the victory through his loyal hand. The realm often preferred a heroic narrative to messy facts. Toward the end of the feast, Ned excused himself from the high table, feeling the press of the hall grow stifling. He slipped out to a side corridor for a breath of cool air. Servants bustled there, carrying trays of fresh wine or platters of sweets. A few drifting guests seemed lost in their own intrigues. It was a relief to be away from the swirl of forced gaiety. He heard a voice call his name softly. Turning, he saw Varys gliding toward him, the master of whispers wearing a mild, ingratiating smile. "My lord Hand," Varys said, dipping his head. "I trust the feast is not too tiring? Such events can be exhausting, yes?" Ned met his gaze warily. "I have endured many. This is no worse than usual." Varys's eyelids fluttered. "Indeed. May I share something that reached my ears? A rumor from beyond the narrow sea." Ned's expression tightened. "Go on." Varys glanced around to ensure no eavesdroppers lurked. "It seems the young Targaryen girl, Daenerys, is rumored to have lost her husband, the Great Khal, in unfortunate circumstances. Yet she remains alive, and potentially allied with some Dothraki who are still loyal. There are whispers of dragons, though one must treat such talk carefully." He paused, weighing Ned's reaction. "We might disregard it as nonsense. But I thought you should be aware, for the king remains, shall we say, concerned about the Targaryen threat." Ned frowned, recalling that Robert once demanded an assassination of the exiled princess. "Dragons are extinct, Varys. We have no reason to believe they've magically returned." Varys shrugged. "So I believe as well, but rumors often hold a kernel of truth. However, it is not my place to interpret, only to inform. Will you tell the king, or shall I?" Ned considered. Robert's hatred of Targaryens had always burned bright, the memory of Rhaegar and Lyanna embedded in his soul. If he heard about Daenerys's precarious situation, he might immediately push for sending assassins again. And after the near-civil war with the Lannisters, the last thing the realm needed was more conflict, even if across the sea. Yet secrecy came with its own risks. "I'll speak with him," Ned said at last. "Though not tonight. Let him have his feast in peace." Varys bowed with delicate courtesy. "Of course. I'm at your service, Lord Stark." With that, the Master of Whisperers drifted away, leaving Ned alone in the corridor, pondering the fragility of it all. Even after the Lannister crisis was subdued, threats loomed from across the sea, from the seeds of anger in the Riverlands, from the hidden truths that could crack the realm wide open. Peace was not a permanent state but a fleeting respite. Ned breathed deeply, then returned to the feast. Days slipped into weeks as the dust of war settled. Soldiers who had served in the campaign returned to their lands or joined new garrisons. The Riverlands teetered between grief for the dead and relief that the raids had ceased. In King's Landing, Ned busied himself with the mundane tasks of a royal hand. By Robert's decree, a large portion of the city's gold cloaks would rotate out to guard certain key roads, hoping to deter bandits and any stray pockets of Lannister mercenaries. Ned ensured that Edmure Tully's grievances were heard and a small but steady stream of coin began flowing west to rebuild. Step by step, the realm tried to heal. Yet in the Red Keep, Ned could feel the tension between Robert and Cersei thickening like storm clouds. The two rarely appeared together except at official functions, and even then their conversation was minimal. Joffrey's name came up more and more often in council sessions. The boy, nearing his 15th name day, was at an age where a new royal wardship or betrothal might be announced. Cersei pressed to secure a powerful match for him while Robert remained indifferent or suspicious. The courtiers whispered that father and son hardly spoke, and whenever Ned saw Joffrey's cruel smirk or heard him torment the stable boys, his heart sank with dread. One bright afternoon, in the Red Keep's courtyard, Ned watched a training session between the young princes and knights of the household. Joffrey, Tommen, and a few other noble youths practiced with wooden swords under the watchful eye of a master at heir. The boy from House Rosby took a hesitant stance while Tommen swung enthusiastically but clumsily. Joffrey sneered at them both. Standing beside Ned was Barristan Selmy, whose face was impassive though his eyes flicked with concern. They train, but it is not the same as learning humility, Barristan murmured. I have tried to instruct the prince in honor, but he does not listen. Ned recalled the days in Winterfell when Robb, Jon, and Theon trained in the yard. There had been camaraderie in their practice, a sense of both rivalry and brotherhood. Here, Joffrey's manner was to belittle, to preen. It made the entire endeavor feel off balance. Ned could only imagine how Robert felt, seeing that reflection of himself absent in the boy. A small crowd watched from one side, including Sansa and Arya, who had traveled to King's Landing in earlier days. But in this version of the tale, Ned had not insisted on either girl's betrothal to Joffrey. The war had interrupted many such plans, leaving Sansa unbetrothed. She still gazed at Joffrey with a mixture of girlish fascination and confusion, as if the illusions of a handsome golden prince warred with the unkind boy she witnessed. Arya, meanwhile, observed from behind a pillar, arms crossed, scowling at Joffrey's every move. Suddenly, the training match turned more heated. Joffrey jabbed the wooden sword too forcefully into the Rosby boy's shoulder, causing him to yelp. Tommen moved forward as if to intervene, but Joffrey snapped at him. Stay out of it, you little weakling. Then Joffrey slammed the wooden sword into the Rosby boy's ribs again. The boy went down with a gasp. Barristan stirred, about to step in. But Ned moved first, crossing the yard quickly. He stooped by the fallen boy, who clutched his side in tears. Joffrey stood above, chest heaving, face twisted with triumph. That's enough, my prince, Ned said quietly, voice stern. He yields. Joffrey glowered. He can't yield if he never fought properly. He's incompetent. Ned's tone sharpened. He's your companion in arms, not your enemy. Put down the sword. You dare give me orders? Joffrey spat. I'm the crown prince. Barristan arrived, a calming presence. He bowed slightly to Joffrey. Your Highness, kindly let the master-at-arms tend to him. You've already proven your skill. Joffrey scowled at both men, then flung the wooden sword aside. Without another word, he strode away from the yard, leaving Tommen wide-eyed and the other boys exchanging uneasy glances. Arya poked her head around the pillar, face alight with anger, but Ned gave her a tiny shake of the head, warning her not to make a scene. Barristan helped the Rosby boy to his feet, murmuring that a maester would see to his bruises. Ned turned to see Sansa with tears in her eyes, perhaps unsettled by Joffrey's cruelty. Arya glowered openly, fists clenched at her sides. Ned's heart felt heavy. If this was the next king, how could the realm endure? He dismissed the children to their quarters. He and Barristan parted ways. Not an hour later, Ned received a summons to the king's solar. He found Robert pacing near a window, face flushed with anger or pain, or both. Outside, the sun lit the sea in a dazzling shimmer, but Robert's mood was black as pitch. He spun on Ned. I hear that whelp Joffrey nearly cracked a boy's rib in the training yard. Did you witness it? Ned spoke calmly. I did. He struck harder than was warranted, especially for friendly sparring. Robert let out a snarl. Gods be good. I don't know what to do with him. He refuses my counsel. He calls me old, weak. Says that when he's king, he'll show the realm how a real ruler acts. Ned's jaw tightened. He's a boy testing boundaries. With proper guidance. Robert cut him off, voice lowering to a painful hush. You said that before, Ned. Perhaps you're right. But something in me screams that he's a lost cause. He paused, a flicker of agony crossing his eyes. I know I've not been the best father. I was always off hunting or drinking or fighting wars. Perhaps that's my failing. If so, the realm might pay for it. Ned placed a hand on Robert's shoulder. The king was a large man, but he seemed diminished by his worries, as if the boar's tusk had carved more than flesh. You're alive, Robert. That alone changes everything. Keep trying to reach the boy. Sometimes, to shape a child, you must let them see the consequences of their actions. Perhaps the day will come when he learns humility. Robert's laughter was hollow. Humility? He's half lion, half. He clenched his teeth on the words. Well, we'll see. Thank you, Ned. In the following weeks, Robert made attempts to moderate Joffrey's behavior, though they often clashed. The prince complained to Cersei, who in turn confronted Robert, each argument drawing them further apart. In the corners of the Red Keep, rumors spread that father and mother were waging a silent war over the shaping of their heir. Guards and servants learned quickly to avoid certain corridors when shouting erupted behind closed doors. Meanwhile, ravens arrived from across the kingdom, some from the north, where the approach of autumn storms threatened the harvest. Some from the Vale, where Lisa Arryn still held her young son and seldom ventured forth. The Vale had played no role in the near war, content to remain behind the mountains of the moon, which vexed Robert to no end since Jon Arryn had once been their beloved father figure. But Lisa's fear of Lannister influence kept her locked away in the Eyrie, refusing to entangle herself. From the Westerlands came word that Tywin Lannister reinforced Casterly Rock with additional garrisons, even as he publicly maintained that all was well. Jaime Lannister continued to serve as Lord Commander of the Kingsguard, though his presence around the palace was curiously sparse. Ned suspected that Jaime often slipped away at night, meeting with Cersei or exchanging ravens with Tywin, plotting who knew what. But thus far, the Lannisters had made no overt moves. One chilly morning, Ned rose earlier than usual, pulled on a doublet, and set out to walk the ramparts. He needed the crisp air, the sense of perspective that came from overlooking the city's sprawl. Torch smoke lingered in the dawn. Overhead, a thin haze of cloud glowed pink with the rising sun. As he rounded a corner near the eastern battlements, he nearly collided with someone else pacing there. It was Stannis Baratheon, Robert's younger brother, come to the city at Robert's behest. Stannis had arrived quietly a fortnight past, having spent months on Dragonstone. His appearance in King's Landing had prompted murmurs, for he rarely left the fortress once the Targaryen's seat and now the Baratheons' ancestral hold in the Narrow Sea. He was a tall, gaunt man with hollow cheeks and a perpetual scowl, his black hair receding at the temples. He wore a plain wool tunic beneath a cloak pinned with the flaming heart of the Lord of Light, though Ned knew Stannis's devotion to the Red Priestess from Aes Sedai was only just budding. The man's old nature of rigid, humorless duty remained. Stannis inclined his head grudgingly. "Lord Stark, you rise early." Ned mirrored the gesture. "Lord Stannis, I could say the same." Stannis moved to the parapet, looking out over the harbor. His voice came out as flat as the slate beneath their boots. "I came to see the city's defenses. Word of your campaign against Tywin reached me late, but I commend you for routing him. Perhaps if I'd been here, I could have added my fleet to your cause." Ned doubted that. Stannis's loyalty was unquestioned, but his sense of timing was often suspect. Still, he inclined his head politely. "You've come now, which is good. The realm can use a steadfast man like you." "Robert is grateful." Stannis's mouth hardened. "Robert rarely expresses gratitude to me, or so it feels. But that's no matter. He has summoned me to the city for a reason, presumably to handle certain naval matters. The Stepstones are swarming with pirates. He wants them cleared if the crown is to maintain trade routes with the free cities." He paused, scanning the waves. He also mentioned the Targaryen girl across the sea. "If the rumors are true that she has some remaining Khalasar, Robert might want me to see that threat ended." Ned frowned. "He hasn't spoken to me of sending you or your ships against Daenerys." Stannis turned, gaze level. "Not yet. But I know my brother. He loathes Targaryens. If the girl ever sets foot in Westeros, Robert will want a swift response. My fleet would be the first line of defense." A slight sneer touched his lips. "I'd prefer to focus on more immediate threats, pirates, smugglers, but Robert's will is absolute." Ned studied Stannis's rigid posture. "The king, I think, has many concerns. We've only just settled with Tywin. Another war is the last thing we need." Stannis gave a curt nod, though his voice was gruff. "War is always the last thing we need, but it finds us nonetheless. Still, I'd not see the realm fall into chaos if that Targaryen girl returns with Dothraki hordes. Even battered from losing her husband, she might gather support from dissidents in Westeros. There are still pockets that remember the old dynasty. Not many, but some." Ned folded his arms, thinking of the complicated knots that bound the Seven Kingdoms. "If it comes to that, the king will call his banners again. But perhaps it will never come. "We've had enough bloodshed for 1 year." Stannis made no reply. He stared out at the sunrise over Blackwater Bay, the orange glow reflected in his dark eyes. Then, with a stiff bow, he departed, leaving Ned to watch the gulls wheel overhead. So the realm's uneasy peace endured. Yet every morning, Ned braced himself for some fresh calamity. One arrived in the form of a letter from Lisa Arryn, addressed to Ned, Robert, and the court at large. It was a tirade, complaining of encroachments by mountain clans near the Vale's borders, of shadowy threats from the Lannisters, of the supposed corruption in King's Landing. She refused to bring young Robert Arryn to the capital, claiming it was unsafe. Robert read the letter during a council meeting, cursing loudly at her accusations of the crown's mishandling of everything from finances to justice. He demanded that she be summoned forcibly, but Ned counseled restraint, reminding Robert that the Vale was a formidable fortress, and forcibly removing Lisa would lead to more strife. In the end, Robert fumed, then threw the letter into the brazier, letting it curl into ash. "My cousin is a fool," he growled. "But we won't start another war just to show it." A fortnight after that, the next crisis centered on the Iron Islands. A small revolt was rumored to be brewing among those Ironborn who chafed under the Greyjoy submission. The talk was that Balon Greyjoy's brother, Victarion, might be testing the crown's vigilance by launching minor raids on the western coasts. Robert nearly spat out his ale when he heard, "Seven hells! Is there anyone in these lands who doesn't want to test me now that I've been wounded?" He ordered a fleet be readied, and Stannis oversaw the dispatch of a handful of war galleys to patrol near Pike. It was a measured response, short of war but enough to signal that the crown was not asleep. Balon, apparently, wrote back with formal denials, claiming the raids were the work of rogue captains, not under his banner. The tension remained, a spark ready to catch if fanned by the wrong breeze. All the while, Ned juggled the duties of governance, overseeing the city's food stores, moderating trade disputes, listening to petitioners who traveled far to stand before the hand of the king. He slept poorly, dreamt of dire wolves howling in the snow, or of battlefields strewn with the dead. He knew the quiet months might be the realm's only chance at respite before the next storm. When winter's chill finally nipped King's Landing, though not a true northern winter, merely a mild cold for the south, Ned found himself summoned once more to Robert's solar late in the evening. He arrived to see the king in his bedchamber, half-dressed, the thick covers thrown aside. Robert was alone, a single lantern flickering. The king's face was flushed, half with anger, half with wine. Robert dismissed the servants, leaving only Ned. Then he exhaled shakily, sinking onto the edge of the bed. "Ned, I'm done dancing around. I want your honest counsel about Joffrey." Ned's heart thudded. "What do you mean, your grace?" "I mean," Robert said, voice barely above a growl, "that if the boy is truly mine, why does he seem to have none of me in him? Not my coloring, not my temper, not even a shred of warmth. He's all golden hair and sneering pride. I've tried to recall if there was ever a Baratheon with that look, but all our line carried black hair." Ned's breath caught. He searched Robert's gaze, saw the torment in those eyes. Robert was on the verge of discovering the truth or suspecting it strongly. One word from Ned would confirm it. The realm would shake if that word was spoken. "Your grace," he said softly, "children don't always take after their fathers in a clear way. Joffrey has your strength, your determination." "Does he?" Robert barked a bitter laugh. "You heard what he's been like in the training yard, how he torments Tommen, bullies half the pages. That's not strength or determination, it's cruelty. Where did it come from?" He pressed a palm against his temple. "Cersei is no gentle soul, but I never dreamed she might stray. Yet a voice in me wonders." Ned's mind spun. He saw the path before him. If he told Robert everything, war with the Lannisters would be inevitable. Robert would feel utterly betrayed. Cersei might be executed, the children named bastards. Thousands would die as Tywin mustered again. Yet if Ned continued to lie, Robert might discover the truth another way and blame Ned for concealing it. A hush followed. Then Ned forced himself to speak. "Your grace, if you have doubts, speak with the queen openly. Demand answers. But be wary of your own counsel. Joffrey may simply be shaped by Cersei's upbringing, by the environment of King's Landing, by the Lannister presence. You were often away. A child can be molded in ways that overshadow blood." Robert stared at him for a long, agonizing moment. Then he released a ragged sigh, as if letting go of a heavy weight. "You're right. Storm the gates, that's always been my way. But if I storm the gates now, I might set the whole city on fire. He closed his eyes. Gods, I'm too tired for this. Go, Ned. Let me sleep. Ned bowed, sorrow twisting in his chest. Good night, your grace. He left, feeling no relief, only a coil of dread. If Robert's suspicions deepened, the fragile peace with House Lannister would dissolve. Days passed, and Robert made no further mention of Joffrey's parentage, at least not directly to Ned. Instead, he threw himself into council matters, determined to project kingly authority. He set about forging new alliances in the Stormlands, awarding small lands and titles to knights who had served well in the campaign against Tywin. In public, the king and queen appeared together more frequently, though always with stony expressions. Perhaps they had exchanged harsh words in private. Ned could only guess. Meanwhile, Tywin Lannister responded to the crown's quiet bounty on Gregor Clegane in a predictably sly manner. He denied all knowledge. Gregor himself vanished into the wilderness of the Westerlands, or possibly slipped into the mountains near the Trident. Various bounty hunters bragged that they would claim the gold, but weeks turned to months, and no word came of success. The Riverlords chafed at the lack of closure, though occasional rumors surfaced that a large man matching Gregor's description had been sighted. Each rumor ended in a fruitless chase. Ned devoted his energies to more pressing tasks, preparing King's Landing for the winter that might soon arrive, ensuring that trade routes with the Reach remained open, smoothing tensions with the Dornish who had always eyed the Iron Throne warily. Little by little, life resumed a semblance of normality. Yet the Red Keep was a nest of vipers, each faction quietly poised, and the king's mood was mercurial, flaring like a dying torch. Then, on a cold morning near the year's turning, a raven arrived from the Westerlands with an invitation that made Ned's heart lurch. Tywin Lannister was to host a grand tournament at Lannisport to celebrate the renewed prosperity and peace of the realm. He invited knights and lords from all corners to attend, including the king himself. The letter dripped with polite arrogance, as though Tywin declared that House Lannister was unbowed by its defeat and eager to demonstrate its wealth. Robert read it aloud in the council chamber, scowling. A grand tournament at Lannisport. He expects me to come and sing praises of House Lannister's generosity. Does he? Or maybe he wants me to show up so we can posture in front of half the kingdom. He tossed the parchment onto the table. What do we say? Renly snorted. It's obviously Tywin's ploy to reassert power. If we ignore the invitation, we might appear weak or still at odds. If we go, we play into his game of Lannister pomp. Damned if we do, damned if we don't. Baelish's eyes glimmered with mischief. Tournaments are splendid events, your grace. The people love them, the lords love them, gold changes hands in wagers. Perhaps it could be an opportunity to reaffirm peace. Robert made a face. If I go, I'll be forced to endure Tywin's company and watch Lannister knights parade around as if they won the last war. Pycelle lifted a shaky hand. Your grace, House Lannister is wealthy enough to make the tournament truly memorable. And if you attend, it shows confidence. No one can say the crown is afraid to set foot in Lannisport. Varys hummed softly. It might also be an opportunity for sabotage. Tywin could arrange an accident if he sees advantage in removing you or the royal children. Yet Tywin is no fool. If anything dire befell the king at Lannisport, the realm would know who to blame and war would resume. Perhaps he truly wants a public show of unity to reassure his bannermen that peace stands. Ned watched Robert's reaction. The king's jaw tightened, but eventually he shrugged. 7 hells, fine. Let it not be said I shy from a challenge. If Tywin wants me at his precious tournament, I'll go and show him I'm not cowed. But I won't go alone. I'll bring half the realm with me. He turned to Ned. You'll accompany me, of course, as will the queen and the children. Let them see the House Baratheon in all its strength. Ned's stomach twisted. The notion of visiting Tywin's seat of power with Cersei at Robert's side and tensions simmering seemed perilous. But the king had spoken. As you will, your grace. So began the preparations for a royal progress to Lannisport. Over the next month, wagons were readied, lords and knights summoned, retinues assembled. The city buzzed with excitement or apprehension, no one was indifferent. By the time the cavalcade departed King's Landing, it stretched for miles along the Gold Road. Robert insisted on traveling with all the trappings of majesty, war horses, carriages for the queen and children, wagons laden with finery. Over 1,000 gold cloaks marched, along with a retinue of knights from the Crownlands and the Stormlands. The small folk lined the roads to cheer or gawk. Ned rode at the head of the column with the king, scanning the horizon for trouble. The last time they had marched these roads, it had been in war. Now it was for a tournament, but the same sense of foreboding crept along Ned's spine. If Tywin truly meant mischief, this was the perfect stage. But if the realm was to move forward, perhaps a show of unity was indeed necessary. For the first week, they traveled unmolested. The nights passed in tented encampments, with watchfires blazing. Robert, though still prone to bouts of pain, tried to maintain a jovial air, hosting dinners beneath large pavilions and inviting lords to gamble or tell war stories. Joffrey sulked or boasted by turns, occasionally sniping at Tommen or Myrcella. Cersei kept mostly to her own tent, reading or conferring quietly with Jaime, who accompanied the escort as Lord Commander of the King's Guard. Jaime rode with that cocksure grace of his, eyes glittering whenever he glanced at Ned. Their last major clash on a battlefield still lingered in the air between them. At the end of the second week, the columns crested a rise and saw the distant glimmer of the sea beyond Lannisport. The city sprawled before them, white stone walls and red-tiled roofs. Beyond, the waters of the Sunset Sea stretched to the horizon. Casterly Rock itself, seat of House Lannister, loomed in the distance, massive and forbidding, carved partly from the rocky promontory that jutted into the ocean. Ned had never seen it in person. Its size was awe-inspiring even from miles away. As they neared the city gates, they encountered Lannister banners fluttering in the breeze, heralds in crimson tabards blowing trumpets to greet the king. Crowds of Lannisport townsfolk lined the streets, shouting welcomes or simply standing in hushed curiosity. Gold cloaks formed a protective ring around Robert's carriage. Joffrey peered out at the throng as though they were creatures in a menagerie. Cersei wore a cool smile, eyes scanning for her kin. Jaime rode ahead to coordinate with the city guard, his golden armor gleaming in the midday sun. Soon they reached the Grand Plaza outside the harbor where Tywin Lannister waited with a retinue of highborn Westerlanders. He stood tall in a crimson cloak lined with ermine, his green eyes and sharp features betraying nothing. At his side was Tyrion, the dwarf, wearing fine doublet and cloak, face set in an inscrutable mask. Behind them were Kevan Lannister, Tywin's loyal brother, and a phalanx of knights. The Lannisters all bowed in unison as Robert's carriage came to a halt. "Welcome, your grace," Tywin said, voice ringing out. "Lannisport is honored to host the king and his court. May your stay be comfortable and your enjoyment of the tournament unsurpassed." Robert stepped down from the carriage with a groan. He stared at Tywin for a moment, tension flickering, then forced a hearty laugh. "Lord Tywin, I trust you've spared no expense. My men are parched from the ride, so I hope you have ale to spare." Tywin bowed again. "Barrels of our finest are at your command, your grace. We have prepared the finest quarters within the city for you and your court." Joffrey followed, along with the queen, Myrcella, and Tommen. The queen inclined her head to Tywin, though her expression was tight. Joffrey barely nodded, looking bored. Myrcella curtsied politely. Tommen stepped forward with wide eyes. Tyrion gave them each a courteous bow, though Ned saw his gaze flicking from one face to another, measuring, assessing. Ned rode up behind Robert, dismounting, his legs stiff. He could almost feel the ground shift underfoot. This was Tywin's domain, where Lannister gold and might were woven into the very stones. A knot formed in Ned's stomach as he recalled how close they had come to open war. Even a single spark here might set the entire region ablaze again. Tywin straightened, meeting Ned's eyes with a hint of a smile that never reached his own. "Lord Stark," he said in that measured tone, "we are pleased to welcome the hand of the king. I trust the ride was not too wearying." Ned inclined his head. "It was long but peaceable. A welcome change from the last time we marched west, my lord." Tywin's mouth tightened infinitesimally. "Indeed. Peace is preferable to war. Shall we proceed?" An honor guard led the way through Lannisport's broad avenues, banners snapping overhead. People pressed in from the sides, craning to see the king's party. Robert pretended a jovial wave, though Ned noted the lines of strain around his eyes. Cersei remained aloof, her chin high. Joffrey returned not a single wave, ignoring the crowds. In contrast, Tommen seemed enthralled, occasionally smiling or pointing at interesting sights. Myrcella's face was calm, carefully schooled. Jaime Lannister guided his horse alongside the royal carriage, watchful. They reached a majestic villa near the port that had been lavishly prepared for the king. Marble columns, gilded carvings, plush carpets, clearly Tywin had spared no cost to impress. Servants bustled about, directing the retinue to their assigned quarters. Over the next few days, the city would fill with knights and lords from all across Westeros, come to joust or spectate. The tourney grounds were already set up outside the walls, massive wooden stands, pavilions in bright heraldry, lists roped off for the jousters. Word was that the prizes would be staggering in their generosity. Late that afternoon, after everyone had a chance to rest, a formal reception took place in the villa's grand hall. Musicians played softly, tables groaned with wine and delicacies, while the king and Tywin exchanged pleasantries in front of assembled guests. It was a spectacle of forced politeness. Tywin praising Robert's reign, Robert praising Lannisport's prosperity, each man eyeing the other for any sign of duplicity. Ned drifted near the edges, gleaning the mood. Jaime circulated with a cocky grin, occasionally exchanging barbs with the Stormland knights who had once fought him. Tyrion sipped wine, occasionally smirking as if at some private jest. Cersei held court with the Westerland ladies, each of whom curtsied deeply. The entire affair felt like a dance on a tightrope above a pit of wolves. That night, as Ned tried to sleep in the lavish guest quarters assigned to him, he couldn't shake a sense of foreboding. A grand tournament could unite the realm or shatter it, depending on who triumphed, who was slighted, who took offense. And with all the grudges still raw, Ned feared the slightest spark might set them all aflame. The next morning, horns sounded from the tourney grounds. The king, clad in finery, set forth in a grand procession accompanied by the queen, Joffrey, and their retinue. Tywin and his family, all in crimson and gold, led the way. Nobles crowded the stands, from the Reach, from the Crownlands, from the North, the Vale, even a few from the Iron Islands. It was a carnival of banners and color. Ned took his seat near Robert's box, scanning the mass of armored knights milling below. It was a who's who of the realm's chivalry, some men he recognized, some he did not. In the far corner, he saw the hound, Sandor Clegane, distinct from his monstrous brother Gregor. Sandor wore House Lannister's colors these days, though more out of necessity than loyalty. The herald stepped forth, listing the names of those who would joust. As the crowd roared, Ned's gaze roamed, settling on each new arrival. Loras Tyrell, the Knight of Flowers, received a wave of applause, as did Ser Balon Swan, Ser Barristan Selmy, and dozens more. The opening ceremonies began with a fanfare, and the king announced that the tourney was dedicated to the strength and unity of the realm. Applause rippled, though Ned caught more than a few skeptical looks. The first justs proceeded smoothly, lances shattering on shields, dust clouds rising from the field. Nobles cheered, bet coins, exclaimed at displays of skill. The tension in Ned's chest eased slightly. Perhaps this truly would be a mere show of pageantry. But the day was still young. As the morning wore on, jousters fell from horses, some battered but few gravely injured. No sign of sabotage, no sign of plot. Ned, though watchful, began to relax. Robert actually laughed at one spectacular tilt, remembering the days of his own youth when he had battered foes with a laugh on his lips. Tywin wore a small, inscrutable smile. Then, during a midday bout, a tall knight in dark armor rode onto the field. His visor was closed, no sigil displayed. The herald announced him only as the Knight of the Storm. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Mystery knights were not uncommon, but this one had a certain ominous air. He lowered his lance, challenging one of Tywin's bannermen to a tilt. The Lannister knight nodded and spurred his horse forward. They met in a thunderous crash. With splintered, the Lannister knight's lance deflected off the Dark Knight's shield. The Dark Knight's lance struck with brutal precision, knocking the Lannister man off his horse. Gasps rang out as the man tumbled, lying still in the dust. Quickly, attendants rushed in. The man was breathing, but dazed or worse. The Dark Knight circled the field, then raised his visor, revealing a bearded face with sharp features. Ned leaned forward, heart jolting. It was Bronn, a known sellsword. He had traveled with Tyrion at times, a cunning, dangerous man. Now he was here, jousting under a false name? Robert frowned. Who is that man? Tywin's jaw tightened. A sellsword, by the look of him. Hardly worthy of a place at this tourney. Must have bribed his way in. The crowd had gone silent, then began buzzing. The king motioned the herald. Tell him to remove himself or unmask if he's no true knight. But Bronn had already revealed his face. He simply neglected to display any heraldry. The herald cleared his throat, stammering, My lords and ladies, the Knight of the Storm is presumably competing for the purse." Bronn turned his horse toward the royal box, voice carrying across the hush. "Your Grace, I claim the right of any man to prove his valor in the lists." He gave a mocking bow. "Even a sellsword can wear armor." A murmur of unease swept the stands. Some lords called for his removal. Others sneered at the very idea. Robert's eyes flashed with anger, but the crowd had grown curious. Then Baelish, leaning near the king's shoulder, muttered something, and Robert gave a dismissive wave. "Fine. Let him ride. If he kills himself in the process, so be it." Thus did the Sellsword remain, continuing to unhorse a series of lesser knights throughout the afternoon, using cunning and aggression. He might not have the refined jousting technique, but he had a ruthless streak. Each man who faced him seemed to falter at the last moment, unprepared for Bronn's fearless style. In the stands, the talk grew lively. Tyrion watched with an inscrutable smile. Tywin's face remained stone. Ned recalled that Bronn was rumored to have earned coin from Tyrion in the past by championing him in a trial by combat. Could this be a message from Tyrion? Or was it just a brazen Sellsword's gamble for glory? By day's end, Bronn remained undefeated in his bracket. He would move on to the next round. The final justs would be on the morrow, culminating in the awarding of the champion's purse. Ned left the stands with a sense of disquiet, marveling at how even a single Sellsword's presence could shift the tone of the entire event. This was no simple merriment. The cracks in the realm's facade ran deep. That evening, the king and Tywin hosted a banquet in Lannisport's Great Hall, a sprawling building near the city center. As Ned made his way inside, the smell of roasted meats and spiced wine enveloped him. Minstrels played a jovial tune. Tables were arranged in a large square around a central open floor. Robert and Tywin sat at the high table with Cersei, Joffrey, Myrcella, Tommen, Jaime, Kevin, Tyrion, and others of high rank. Ned found his seat not far away, next to Ser Barristan and a few Stormland lords. The mood was outwardly festive, yet overshadowed by the day's events. Midway through the feast, while a troupe of dancers performed, Tywin raised a goblet and called for attention. The chatter subsided, all eyes on the Lord of Casterly Rock. He stood, elegantly regal in his crimson doublet, threads of silver in his close-cropped hair. In honor of His Grace King Robert Baratheon, Tywin said, voice carrying through the hall, and the renewed bond between House Lannister and the Crown, I announce that tomorrow's final joust purse shall be doubled. Let all see that we value prowess and bravery. Cheers rose in the hall, though some lords exchanged sharp glances. Doubling the purse was a grand display, hinting that Lannister gold flowed freely once more. Robert forced a grin, raising his own cup. House Lannister's generosity is truly without limit, he boomed, drawing laughter from parts of the room. Tywin turned toward Robert with a small smile, inclining his head. We do what we can for the realm, Your Grace. After he resumed his seat, the music and conversation picked up again, but Ned could taste the tension in the air. Tywin was playing a game, flaunting his wealth, daring any to question it. The next day's justs would be more heated than ever, with the champion's purse doubled. That meant more risk of bloodshed, more knights riding recklessly. And Bronn, who had already defied convention, might be even more emboldened. Later, after the feast ended, Ned wandered outside to cool his head. The coastal wind carried brine and the distant sound of ship bells. He found a quiet spot near a fountain lit by torches. As he gazed into the rippling water, footsteps approached, and he turned to see Jaime Lannister stepping into the torchlight, golden armor replaced by a fine tunic. The Kingslayer wore a faint, sardonic grin. Lord Stark, Jaime said, drawing out the syllables. A lovely evening for reflection, is it not? Ned stiffened. Their last extended encounter had nearly come to swords. He remembered seeing Jaime in the thick of battle outside the Riverlands, how the man fought with lethal grace. Sir Jaime, Ned returned, his tone cautious. Jaime strolled closer, gloved hands clasped behind his back. I was reflecting myself on how swiftly fortunes change. A few moons ago, you had my father cornered on the field, fresh from victory. Now we dine together, chat politely, all is sweetness and courtesy. Amusing, isn't it? Ned frowned. War is a costly enterprise. Peace is sometimes found in uneasy truces. If you're mocking the notion, I can't stop you. Jaime shrugged. Oh, I'm not mocking. Just observing. My father is patient, you see. He never forgets a slight. But he's wise enough to bide his time for the right moment. The question is whether the rest of the realm is equally patient. A surge of alarm flared in Ned's chest. Is that a threat? Jaime held up a hand as if placating. Not at all. A simple statement. The next time swords cross, I suspect it won't be as civil as this. But who knows? Perhaps the realm will enjoy a generation of peace. He flashed a grin that did not reach his eyes. Though I doubt it. Peace bores me. Ned watched him carefully. Jaime's words carried the ring of prophecy. Tywin still nursed his pride. Perhaps he would never fully forgive the defeat in the Riverlands. For now, though, they all had to keep up appearances. Then enjoy your father's tournament, Ned said quietly. If you see it as a sign of peace or a stage for future grudges, that's your affair. Jaime smirked, turned on his heel, and disappeared back into the hall. Ned stared at the flickering torch flames reflecting off the water, tension knotting his stomach again. Tomorrow's final just loomed. The best knights would ride Barristan, Loras, the Hound, maybe Jaime himself, and that mysterious Sellsword. Possibly even others. And with the purse doubled, men might be desperate or reckless enough to risk everything. He lingered a while longer, letting the night air calm him before returning to his quarters. Sleep came fitfully, haunted by images of lances splintering, men toppling, the lion's roar echoing through Lannisport. The morning dawned with a brilliant blue sky. Trumpets sounded across the city as throngs poured into the tourney grounds. The stands filled rapidly with merchants, peasants, and nobles alike. The king's box was resplendent in Baratheon gold and black, with House Lannister's crimson and gold sharing the dais. Robert sat in the center, Cersei on one side, Tywin on the other. Joffrey, Myrcella, and Tommen were arranged just behind, with Jaime and the Kingsguard in a protective arc. Ned, in his role as Hand, took a seat close by. The day's format was a single elimination bracket among the top jousters from the prior events. Knights and some hedge knights lined up to draw lots. Ned's eyes lingered on each rider, Barristan Selmy, helmet under his arm, face calm. Loras Tyrell, hair in a neat swirl, his plate polished. The Hound, scowling beneath his half-burned face. A handful of Westerland knights, sworn to Tywin. A few from the Vale, the Reach, the Stormlands. And Bronn, standing aloof, visor down. The tension was palpable. Each tilt was announced by the herald, the crowd roaring as the horses thundered. Loras unhorsed a Westerland knight with a deft blow. Barristan bested a brash young challenger. The Hound overcame a Vale rider. The crowd soared in excitement, coins passing hands and bets. Robert cheered lustily, raising cups of ale, wincing occasionally from his healing side but determined to appear strong. Tywin nodded politely at each display, betraying no preference. When Bronn took the field against a veteran Stormland knight, there were murmurs that his luck had to end. But with cunning footwork and a slight swerve of his mount, Bronn avoided a solid strike while delivering a glancing blow that unbalanced his opponent. The Stormlander crashed to the ground. Boos and cheers intermixed as Bronn advanced, raising a hand in mocking salute to the king's box. Robert scowled. Round after round, the field narrowed. Loras faced the Hound in a fierce contest reminiscent of that famous joust at the Hand's tourney in King's Landing long ago. Loras took the first pass, but the Hound hammered back on the second. Eventually, Loras managed a well-aimed strike that knocked the Hound's shield away. The Hound kept his seat but lost the tilt on points. Loras progressed. The Hound stalked away, cursing. Barristan triumphed in his bracket, though each pass tested his age and reflexes. By the time he reached the semifinal, the wear showed, but his skill carried him through. Then, shockingly, in a late quarterfinal, Bronn faced a renowned Westerland knight famed for his jousting. The crowd expected Bronn to be defeated at last. But the Sellsword used a trick. He angled his shield to catch the opponent's lance tip, twisting it aside at the last second. The knight lost balance, soared off the horse. Gasps erupted. Boos came from the Westerland stands, while others marveled at Bronn's brazen tactics. So the final four were Barristan Selmy, Loras Tyrell, a Crownlands knight named Ser Jastin Burns, and the Sellsword Bronn. The crowd buzzed with excitement. Robert leaned forward, half in disbelief, half in curiosity. Tywin's lips pressed thin. First, Loras faced Ser Jastin, unhorsing him after 2 passes in a beautiful display of technique. Then Barristan rode against Bronn. The entire arena seemed to hold its breath. On the first pass, Barristan's lance struck Bronn's shield strongly, but Bronn somehow maintained his seat. Barristan reeled from Bronn's own glancing blow. On the second pass, Bronn feinted slightly to one side, surprising Barristan. The venerable knight was forced to adjust mid-charge, losing momentum. The blow connected awkwardly. And Barristan slid from the saddle, though not heavily. The crowd erupted in shock. Barristan rose, dusting himself off, accepting the result with knightly grace. But the crowd was stunned. A Sellsword had beaten Ser Barristan Selmy. Boos mingled with cheers, depending on which stands one listened to. Bronn calmly dismounted, offered Barristan a hand, which the older knight accepted with a curt nod. Then Bronn turned to face the king's box, raising his visor. He called out, "Your Grace, it seems I've advanced to the final. I hope you'll watch closely as I face Ser Loras Tyrell. May the best man win." A hush. Robert's face was thunderous. Tywin sat stony while the Queen wore a bemused smile. Jaime Lannister snorted softly. Then Robert grudgingly inclined his head. "Very well. Proceed." So it was set. Loras Tyrell, the beloved Knight of Flowers, paragon of chivalry, versus Bronn, a man with no crest and no claim to nobility. The difference in their stations could not have been starker. The crowd hummed with tension as the two lined up at opposite ends of the till. Gold and white roses decorated Loras's armor, no ornament adorned Bronn's battered plate. At the horn's sound, they thundered forward. On the first pass, Loras's lance crashed against Bronn's shield, cracking it. Bronn's blow hit Loras's armor but failed to dislodge him. They swung around for the second pass. Again, hooves pounded, lances aimed. This time, Bronn shifted sideways mid-charge. Loras tried to compensate, but Bronn's lance struck with cunning force, twisting Loras's shield. Loras toppled, hitting the ground in a clang of steel. He landed heavily, though he tried to roll. The stands exploded with sound. Many cheered, many more booed or gasped. The Knight of Flowers was unhorsed by a cell's word. Attendance officials rushed in, confirming the result. Loras, winded, pulled off his helm. He glared at Bronn, though not in outright hatred, perhaps only in disbelief. Ned saw Mace Tyrell in the stands, face red with outrage. And Bronn simply raised his arms. He had done the impossible, bested the greatest jousters of the realm with cunning, not chivalry. The herald cleared his throat, voice ringing with reluctance. The champion, the Knight of the Storm, or rather, heir, or Master Bronn, cell's word and man-at-arms, stands victorious. Robert scowled. Tywin's face was unreadable. Jaime's eyes sparkled with amusement. The king rose slowly, every eye on him. Protocol demanded he present the champion's laurel. Robert marched forward, beckoned Bronn to kneel. The Sellsword did so, helmet in hand, face solemn. Bronn, Robert declared, forcing each word. You have prevailed. We said we would award the champion's purse, doubled by Lord Tywin's generosity. You shall have it. Rise. Bronn stood, faint smirk on his lips. The king glared. Let none say that skill belongs only to highborn knights. Today you proved otherwise. Tywin stepped forward, offering a heavy pouch of gold to Bronn with a curt bow. The hush was eerie. Then, in pockets of the stands, scattered applause broke out, hedge knights, commoners, those who took glee in an underdog's victory. Nobles, though, sat stiffly. A Sellsword champion offended their sensibilities. Ned studied Bronn's expression. Was this entire spectacle arranged to slight Tywin, or to needle Robert? Did Tyrion put Bronn up to it, or was Bronn acting on his own ambition? Whatever the reason, the damage was done. The final note of Tywin's glorious tournament was overshadowed by an unorthodox, low-born champion who had toppled the best. The tension in the air was palpable as the king and Tywin returned to their seats, uncertain whether to end the tournament with celebration or an awkward hush. That night, the city's mood was chaotic. Some celebrants roamed the streets praising the cunning champion, while outraged knights drank themselves into a stupor in taverns, grumbling about the realm's downfall. Within the Lannister villa, the official feast was a forced affair. Robert barely hid his disdain. Cersei avoided speaking to him altogether. Tywin's courtesy turned to ice. Mace Tyrell fumed, complaining that his son had been cheated by trickery. Many from the Westerlands muttered that the champion had stolen an honor meant for a true knight. Bronn himself was nowhere to be seen. He had collected his purse and slipped away, presumably to spend or gamble his winnings. Ned took a long walk by the harbor after midnight, pondering the situation. The tournament had concluded without direct violence between great houses, yet a new wave of resentments now brewed. Pride had been stung. A cunning move in the justs might be overshadowed by further intrigue. And Robert's earlier doubts about Joffrey, about Cersei, about Tywin, all loomed. War had been averted once, but the realm's fault lines were still raw. On the final day of the royal visit, Robert and Tywin exchanged stiff farewells, pledging continued friendship. The king's retinue prepared to depart. Joffrey, in a sullen mood, refused to speak with any Lannister beyond his mother. Tommen was tearful about leaving, having made a new friend among the local pages. Myrcella was quiet, eyes downcast. As for Cersei, she embraced Tywin, whispered something in his ear, then joined the royal caravan. Jaime remained behind on some stated business from the king to review Lannisport's defenses with Tywin, though Ned suspected it was a chance for father and son to strategize. They left Lannisport on a cold, gray morning, the sea winds biting at them. The banners drooped. Spirits were low. On the horizon, dark clouds threatened a storm. Ned rode near the front, Robert beside him, the gold cloaks and knights forming a protective column around the royal family. For a while, they rode in silence, the horses' hooves clopping on the damp road. At length, Robert sighed heavily, looking over his shoulder at the receding shape of Lannisport. By the gods, Ned, all that pomp for nothing. Tywin's gold wasted, a Sellsword crown champion. And the tension is worse than before. I can feel it. Ned inclined his head. At least there was no bloodshed between our houses. Robert grunted. Yet. For now. He turned his gaze forward, the gold road stretching ahead. I used to love tournaments. Now they taste like ashes. Ned pressed a hand to Robert's arm, a small gesture of solidarity. We'll manage, Robert. The realm endures for now. Robert nodded, though his eyes reflected a weariness that ran deeper than any physical wound. The caravan trudged onward, heading back to King's Landing. Each mile carried them closer to a capital that bubbled with rumor, faction, and the looming threat of winter's arrival. And Ned Stark, the Hand of the King, wondered how long this fragile peace could hold in a land where ancient grudges and hidden truths coiled beneath every courtesy, waiting for the moment to strike. He pictured the future, Joffrey's sneer on the throne, Tywin's cunning maneuvers, Cersei's relentless ambition, the Targaryen girl rumored to be stirring across the sea. It was like walking through a forest of tinder with sparks drifting on the wind. He silently prayed to the old gods for wisdom and steadiness, for the realm had survived the first test, but many more lay ahead. And if war erupted again, it might burn hotter than any that had come before. So they rode on, banners snapping in the rising wind, hearts weighed with foreboding, along the road that led back to King's Landing and whatever fate awaited them all.